Mistress decides to take husband, but just one question from wife. Wine at lunch, Amanda? Are you serious? Rachel looked greedily at her friend as she sat at a table in the cafe. I think we have something to drink too. Amanda smiled slyly and took a glass of the yellowish noble drink. She'd called Rachel to dinner last night on the pretext of interesting conversation. The gossipy and story-hungry friend had agreed without hesitation. And there was indeed an occasion. Amanda flirtatiously fixed her black hair, showing off the new earrings in her ears. I think I know what we're going to talk about, Rachel said understandingly. A new suitor, and not a poor one at that. Are you observant? Amanda said. The waiter put their dishes in front of the girls and smiled. So tell me, Rachel begged as the waiter disappeared. I can't wait any longer. Amanda hesitated a moment. It was her favorite pastime to pickle her girlfriend and give her information bit by bit. For Rachel's magpie, this was a real mockery. He's in the restaurant business. Rich, handsome, generous, gallant. And he drives the latest Lexus, Amanda blurted out. Rachel imitated being hit in the heart by Cupid's arrow and hung on the chair. Then she woke up and looked at her friend with admiration. What a catch. How long have you two been together? She eagerly prepared to hear about a week. We met? You won't believe it. At the flower shop, Amanda sipped from her glass. I went there to pick out flowers for a future order. I came out with a bouquet of white roses for myself. Tell me about it. Rachel couldn't stop raving about it. At least show me a picture of this oligarch. Amanda reached into her purse for her phone. A few manipulations and the friends were already looking at a photo of the man. The suit fits just right. Authoritative, Rachel said. The businessman's face, the haircut. You can see that it's not from Aunt Natasha at the hairdresser's. Tight, but not a man, but a dream. Rachel sighed enviously under her palm. She herself hadn't had a boyfriend in 6 months, and the last beau wasn't distinguished by such a set of virtues. Suddenly, Rachel's eyes gleamed with a thought she had forgotten. She straightened up and, bowing her head shrewdly, looked at Amanda. But we all know there's always at least some downside, don't we? The girls had long ago realized that no matter how perfect a man seemed at first glance, he was bound to have a flaw. It was an unwritten rule. A handsome biker turned out to be a womanizer, a rich businessman a lover to lay behind the collar, a charismatic boss a rude. Got any? Amanda admitted with a sigh. Married. But Rachel waved her hand dismissively. It's nothing. The girls giggled, and the clinking of glasses resounded through the cafe. Wives never bother us, Amanda nodded in agreement. Especially a wife like that, yuck. The girl wrinkled her nose, showing her disdain for her unknown rival. No manicure, no styling. She sits at home like a pussy. In a word, a simpleton. Really? Gossip girlfriend was surprised. Go ahead, tell me. Did you look into your husband's friends? She's there. I've already looked through them all. Amanda gestured to stop her impulse. I'll show you. She started clicking the smartphone screen again with a finger with a shiny red fingernail. Soon the two friends saw a picture of a woman in her 40s, with a simple haircut, wearing a business suit and blouse. What, does she work as a teacher? Or an accountant? He, Rachel said seriously. Such a handsome man is married to this misunderstanding? Are you sure? It's for the best. Amanda blew her fringes out of her eye. Look at me and her and me. It's obvious to a fool who a normal man would rather be with. Rachel gave her friend a finicky look, as if she was seeing her for the first time. It was pointless to argue with her argument. It wasn't even interesting to win her over. Amanda yawned. She seemed to be about 7 years older than him. He'd probably married her as a gray mouse for appearance's sake. And she's happy to stay at home and forgive him. I know that kind of simpleton. She'd do anything to get her husband to come home at night. Yes, Rachel said, finishing her wine. But you're planning to make it so that he won't even come home to her in the end, aren't you? How will the poor girl survive that? The girls laughed at their own witticisms. Marcus liked the new car. It was big, beautiful, modern, and of course very expensive. His fingers felt the leather surface of the steering wheel. The interior smelled rich too, and let the car belong to the wife, it was only indicated in the car document and insurance. The ladies would not go into his glove compartment to study the documents, and the fact that Marcus was driving a premium foreign car was enough for them. The phone rang. Marcus glanced at the screen. It was Marion. He pressed a button on the steering wheel, and his wife's voice came out of the speakers. Marcus, today is Chef Maggie's 50th anniversary at the Lakeside restaurant. Please buy some bouquets and congratulate her on our behalf. Marion spoke quickly and clearly. Okay, he replied briefly and switched off. Marcus didn't like his wife. He was shy and tried not to appear with her anywhere, except at family events. He rather treated her as a long-time, good but unattractive friend. Marion was older, preferred to dress in quietly colored, comfortable clothes made of natural fabrics, wore modest makeup and never dyed her hair. However, she possessed acumen, intelligence, and managed to become a successful businesswoman by the age of 38. They met when Marcus, 31, who had just arrived from the provinces, came to work as a receptionist in a newly opened restaurant. Then he realized that by courting Marion he could settle down well in life, which he did, becoming first the executive director of the chain, and then the husband of the owner of a large business with brilliant success. Only nature began to take its toll after a few years. Marcus was lucky, and nature has put in him all the best that can give a man in terms of appearance: broad shoulders, strong-willed chin, and tall, charming smile, without female attention to leave impossible. Next to his gray and unattractive wife, he began to wither. And then Marcus decided that he should not deny himself young, long-legged, appetizing beauties. These beauties changed from time to time, and Marcus never took any of them seriously. He carefully hid his affairs from his wife and successfully took advantage of her labor, money, and position. And Marcus didn't care who or what anyone thought about it. The main thing was to keep his wife calm. And so 7 years passed. Marcus was walking down the street. A flower shop could be seen up ahead. Deciding not to delay, he turned on his turn signal and pulled into a nearby car park. He figured a simple bouquet of chrysanthemums or carnations for Maggie would be enough. The doors of the shop rattled Asian bells that made pleasant trills when they touched. There was another customer in the room besides the florist's. She was meticulously inspecting expensive orchids and large white roses. Marcus was too interested in the girl, and for a few moments he even forgot why he had come here in the first place. The florist's voice brought him out of his oblivion. "Young man, can I help you?" "Yes, I'd like a bouquet for the 50th anniversary for a woman." Marcus quickly collected himself, not losing sight of the pretty customer. "A relative, mum?" specified the florist. "No, colleague, no frills." "Formal congratulations," Marcus replied dryly and nodded at the lilac chrysanthemums. The florist sighed for some reason and started packing the flowers. Slender petite brunette, long hair, blue eyes, just the way he liked it. Too pretty to miss. He'd regret it later. Marcus imagined the pleasant picture for a moment, a pleasant warmth in his chest. "These are the best roses, White Angel," he said, standing behind the girl. "They are given only to those who love them." The stranger turned round and glanced at his business suit and the car keys in his hand. A solid man. It had always worked. There are so many women in the world right now who crave male attractiveness that the one who possesses it is given the sweetest choice. "You know about flowers?" the girl asked, flirtatiously fixing her hair. "I know who to give them to." Marcus smiled dazzlingly. "Yes," the girl raised an eyebrow. "And what kind of flowers would you give me?" Marcus realized that he had not fallen for a beautiful simpleton, but for a girl with a temper. The excitement got the better of him. The man smiled again and turned to the florist, who was just finishing packing the chrysanthemums. "Would you be so kind as to give me another 21 white roses from the ones the girl had chosen?" He readily took out his wallet from the inside pocket of his jacket under the astonished gaze of the stranger. Out into the street they walked together. Marcus with a bouquet of chrysanthemums and his sudden companion with a bouquet of white roses. "Do you give all the girls such bouquets when you meet them?" she asked with a smile. No, Marcus put his wallet away. "You're the first girl in 9 years to get a blush on her cheeks. I'm flattered. And I hope you won't refuse me dinner tonight? I won't. She held out her hand to him. Amanda. Marcus kissed the outstretched palm, looking into her eyes. Marcus. Avignon Restaurant, 20. I might be a little late. I think that's allowed on a first date. Marcus paused for a second, feigning reflection. See you tonight, Amanda. See you tonight, Marcus. He walked to the car, got behind the wheel, started the engine. All the while watching the girl. The suit, the car, and the charm worked flawlessly. Marcus winked to himself in the rearview mirror and drove out of the car park. By evening, the young lady would be completely lost in her own dreams. She'd be willing to do anything, although she's too beautiful to limit herself to one evening. It's been a while since he's had a long-term affair. Who knows, maybe it was time. Marcus's first thought was to schedule a meeting at his restaurant. But then he thought better of it and chose the one 2 streets away so he wouldn't have to make a big fuss about traveling. Amanda, as warned, was 20 minutes late. But she came in a skirt with a slit that made Marcus hot. Dinner quickly made it clear that they were both adults. I want to tell you right away, Marcus twirled his whiskey glass in his hands. I'm married, but I don't like her. I'm married, but I don't love her. And it was done for the sake of formality. Marcus looked at Amanda carefully, sipping from the glass of red dry wine. You know, I'm not in the mood to have a family yet either. And I'm sorry to be frank, but domesticity isn't really my thing. She ran her finger along the stem of the glass. We both know what we want from each other. And your wife isn't a hindrance. Marcus smiled. Rarely had any of his dates reacted so calmly to that fact. Usually there were regrets, recriminations, sometimes even tantrums and demands. He quickly sent them away. A toy is a toy, not to tell its master its rules. Dinner ended at the hotel. Both got what they wanted from each other. Marcus didn't stay the night and went home, promising to call the other day. Amanda was left alone lying on the snow-white sheets. She had no regrets about what had happened. Moreover, she realized that she had attacked a big fish, and that it was extremely unprofitable for her to show her temper to excess. She had to be an affectionate pussycat, at least at first. And then he'd stay over and divorce his wife. Patience, Amanda. Patience, she said to herself, looking at the teapot hanging on the wall, handsome, clever, not poor. It's worth the effort. Marian collapsed exhausted on the sofa in the drawing room. She'd been on her feet since this morning, traveling to suppliers, looking for an accounting error, interviewing the new chef, ordering cutlery. When you own a chain of restaurants, there's little time to rest. Every day there's something to do. Marian understood that when she got into the catering business. But she loved what she did. She studied to be a chef herself, then successfully completed a course in personnel management. She worked almost 9 years in an elite restaurant and knew this sphere from the inside out. And then, with the money from the sale of her grandmother's flat, opened her own business, and in the same year she met her future husband, Marcus. Marian did not hesitate long and agreed to Marcus' proposal because she had no time to look for a life partner. She spent those years on building a business and work, which other girls spent on dating. Marcus was handsome, and Marian was flattered that he had chosen her. Soon her husband proved he had good business acumen too, and Marian made him the manager of her chain of establishments. Evil tongues said that Marcus was cheating on her. But the woman didn't believe it, or didn't want to believe it, or didn't have time. Marian's head could plan, allocate, estimate, forecast everything about her business. But in matters of subtle relationships, the woman was as inexperienced as a teenager. It was only by some miracle that Marian had not made her husband co-owner of the chain, enchanted by his charm. She glanced at her watch. It was the beginning of 12. There was a bustle in the hallway. "You're late today too," Marian stepped out into the corridor, greeting her husband. Yes, Marcus nodded briefly, taking off his jacket. There was a problem with the new uniforms for the waiters. Took a long time to sort it out. On that dressmaker. Marian sighed. Always letting us down. You don't say. Marcus kissed her briefly on the cheek and went into the room to change. Have you had dinner? I brought something back from Maggie's anniversary mini banquet. 10 minutes later, they were seated at a large table in the posh kitchen. Marian couldn't remember the last time she'd cooked anything substantial here herself. They usually had a quick breakfast like coffee and waffles or scrambled eggs. Lunch was at work, and dinner was delivered. There was too much to do during the day to cram in a couple of hours of cooking. Marian loved the culinary craft, though, and had once taught the chef of her first restaurant herself how to properly tenderize meat and how to turn any tomatoes into Bacchus tomatoes. A sophisticated observer would have noticed at once how Marcus's mood dimmed next to Marian, how he struggled to contain all the brightness he had had with his many mistresses. His gaze was becoming gray and lifeless. Marcus's movements were becoming quick but restrained. Conversations were acquiring an average politeness. At first he tried to show attention to his wife, but quickly realized that she was incapable of giving him what other women gave him. Marcus opted for a different tactic, rarely showing up at home, giving the usual gifts once a month, being polite and never arguing. "Why don't we watch one episode of that show?" Marian suggested it. "Marian, I'd love to, but I'm exhausted. My eyes are watering. I barely made it home." Marcus tactfully dismissed it, and at the same time yawned and rubbed his eyelids. Marian sighed. She knew they had both been on their feet all day, but she hoped for a miracle. Deep down, the woman unconsciously wanted romance, to snuggle up to her beloved husband, cover herself with a blanket and fall asleep to her favorite film. Marcus set the plate down and left to shower. When Marian reached the bedroom, he was already sound asleep. The woman lay down next to him and hugged her spouse. The pillow quickly carried her into slumber. "Marcus, there are some guests asking for you in the hall." Cassandra, a waitress, peeked in the mini cabinet where Marcus did all the paperwork for the restaurant. "Is something wrong?" The man lifted his head from his laptop. "No, nothing," Cassandra said, embarrassed for some reason, very soft and secretive. But Marcus noticed. He always noticed how women trembled if he gave them his attention, especially young provincial girls. Marcus subconsciously evaluated all the female employees who came in for interviews, and again subconsciously only took those he liked. Marcus liked Cassandra and found her work a pleasure to watch. "I'll be right down," the restaurant manager said after a moment's thought. Marcus adjusted his jacket and went into the hall. Amanda was seated at the steam table by the window with the grace of a panther. She smiled radiantly at him and stood up in greeting. The man was pleasantly surprised and sat down across from her. "How are you?" Amanda sipped her coffee with an innocent smile. "What are you doing here?" Marcus asked in a muffled voice. "I missed you," she said, batting her eyelashes even more innocently. "It was easy to find out from the photo in your account which restaurant you owned. So here I am." Marcus admired her discreetly and was no longer at all discreetly examining his mistress. Amanda certainly knew how to present herself at her best. Today she came in tight trousers, shoes, and a bright, fitted white blouse that accentuated her long, dark hair. "Cassandra, bring the guest a tiramisu on the house," Marcus ordered as he ran past the waitress. "Marcus, you're so generous. You're an eagle," Amanda said admiringly and ingratiatingly at the same time. Marcus was unknowingly filled with pride. Anyone who says that only women like to receive compliments is lying. It works for both sexes. "And I thought I should ask you out tonight," she continued, picking up the foam from the coffee with her spoon. "Go on," Marcus put his palm on the table. "Today at the theater there's a performance of Woe from Wit. I think a cultural evening wouldn't hurt after last night." Amanda smiled at the corner of her lips and raised her eyebrow expressively. "But I'm afraid I don't have the right outfit for such a place. Can you help me out?" Marcus chuckled. He was thinking of calling his mistress tonight, and now she had taken the initiative, as if she had read his mind. Initiative, beautiful girls were Marcus's favorite. It lubricated the fact that he was being asked for a gift. The man smiled enigmatically back at Amanda, pulled out his smartphone, made a couple of movements, and a bank notification sounded. "I took care of the tickets." He tucked the device into an inside pocket. "And you make sure I have something to look at after the theater." Amanda nodded understandingly. She bent across the table and kissed Marcus on the cheek. "Now I have to leave you alone." "Work's not waiting." Marcus got up from his chair. "See you tonight. And have a nice rest, as we say." He winked goodbye to Amanda and left. She stared until her lover disappeared, and then quickly glanced at the screen of her smartphone, nodding to herself in satisfaction. Amanda took a bite of the dessert she'd brought, putting the phone to her ear at the same time. Of course it worked. "Did you ever doubt me?" "These trousers work wonders," Amanda remarked contentedly. "Yeah, we're going to the theater tonight." Sure, she nodded. The waitress, who was passing by, was used to not listening to the guests' conversations. For her, it was a routine of her working day. A month passed. At first, Marcus allowed himself to see his mistress only during breaks and free days, but soon she swallowed up all his space and fell somewhere so deep, somewhere where a man did not usually let girls in for fun. Amanda knew how to be different, adapting like a chameleon to his moods, but in every form she was unfailingly beautiful. She said what he wanted to hear, admired him, and that spurred Marcus on even more. Marion never acted like that. She was the same in every form and situation. Calm, reserved, with a trace of businesslike behavior on her face. Amanda, on the other hand, gave Marcus the emotions he needed. They traveled together to museums, exhibitions, events, and even once went shopping at a country holiday resort. "I think someone's in love." Rachel was sprawled on the sofa in Amanda's tiny flat on the outskirts of the city. "And that someone isn't me," her friend grinned. "He's great. Anybody would be great if they had money. But here I got a big bonus in the form of looks." "As usual, you do not tell a lot about yourself. You don't invite me home?" Rachel pulled a candy from a vase on the shelf. "I'm telling you what I need to tell you for now. Wedding planners love Mediterranean food, European culture, and quality clothes. He doesn't need to know about the rented flat and my former romances," Amanda replied, chattering her foot on the chair next to her. "The task is to get him away from his wife, and then we can share other things." "Well, uncle, you know how to get a man round." Rachel sighed glumly. "And I only get some. God forgive me, squirrels fall for me. I'll never get a warm place for myself." "The main thing is not to despair and not to lose yours," Amanda encouraged her. "Who knows where you'll find the right one? Mine was an accident at the flower shop. It could have turned up anywhere. Maybe yours is waiting for you in the sausage section of the grocery store," Amanda pondered. "They need to be tested. Test them somehow." She pondered, and Rachel, shrugging her shoulders and munching on another candy, suggested, "Well, let's do the usual. Let him take you on holiday or give you an expensive ring. It's a little early for young people." Amanda shook her head. "A little later, when he's ripe for divorce." "Honey, if you keep dragging your feet like this, he'll never be ripe for divorce." Rachel stood up from the couch with her arms at her sides. "We need to make our position clear. Let's at least take those shoes, remember? These fit." Amanda gave her friend a sly look. "Come on, let's go try the shoes on." Rachel gave her a thumbs up and looked around for her purse. Marion was looking through paperwork, sitting in the car next to her husband Marcus. The two of them had been whizzing around the city on business since early morning. Traffic, calls, urgency. Marion knew how to take it all in stride. Experience had taught her. But Marcus didn't like such fuss and was nervous, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel and complaining about the increase in purchase prices. Meat had skyrocketed in the last month, especially beef. "What are they doing in the middle of summer? Raise prices. The cows have plenty to eat," he grumbled. "Vaccinations, grain, fuel, electricity," Marion said calmly, keeping her eyes on the papers. "One grows, the other grows too. So far, we're getting along, and we'll keep the prices of the meals. The guests are used to our conditions. We'll raise them if there's another 20 to 30% markup on meat. And we'll make less money," Marcus disagreed. "We'll wait and see," the woman replied. "Seafood has gone up too. Everything is getting more expensive. Maybe we shouldn't buy a new freezer. We should raise the prices." Marcus didn't give up. "We need a freezer," Marion objected. "The old one broke down twice, and the cooks lost a considerable amount of food." Marcus wondered where else he could save money and how he could cover his expenses for Amanda. Meat and seafood were indeed getting more expensive, but not as critical as he had outlined. He realized that a beautiful mistress was costing him more and more. But Marcus couldn't help himself. He wanted to be with her, to spoil her. When his phone rang, alerting him to a new messenger message, he glanced at the device. The screen flashed up with the photo that had been sent. Marcus quickly looked at the message, trying to do so as calmly as possible. But Marion still noticed his eyebrow twitch, and a shot of a woman's high-heeled shoes flashed across the glass in the reflection of the screen. A nasty but very understandable feeling took hold inside her. By an effort of will, Marion suppressed it. But the cold snake of suspicion had already crept further down her back, freezing her spine with jolts. "Is it something important?" the woman asked her husband as if casually. "Work chat. Someone sent jokes," Marcus said, watching the traffic lights carefully on the bend. Marion nodded absently. Her thoughts wouldn't let her go. A couple of minutes later, they arrived at the restaurant to settle work matters. Marion attacked the cook with questions. Marcus immediately slipped away to the terrace to call someone. "You sent me the picture at a bit of a bad time," he tried to make his voice sound confident, as if he were jokingly cajoling. "I thought the wife couldn't see our messages," Amanda remarked softly into the receiver. Stung by this gentleness, Marcus quickly pulled himself together. "This space of mine belongs to me. But there are times when embarrassments happen." "It was worth it," came the voice in the receiver. "Do you want to buy those shoes? They go so well with my new handbag. It would be a huge mistake not to get them. Besides, they'll make me look even brighter next to you." Marcus swallowed his saliva, imagining the shoes on his lover's slender legs. Beauty and feminine magic did the trick. "Okay, I'll see you in them tomorrow," he said without hanging up. Marcus logged into online banking and sent the required amount to Amanda's card. "Is it enough?" he asked. "Yes, of course it is." "Thanks, kitten." The girl on the other end of the phone was full of gratitude. "I'll be sure to wear them tomorrow," Amanda said. Marcus said goodbye and tucked the phone into his pocket, looking forward to the meeting. He had always found a certain power and pleasure in his relationships with beautiful women. Whose money went to these whims was a tenth matter. Marion came out onto the terrace, too, plagued by questions from the staff. Her head was boiling from the abundance of information, but outwardly the businesswoman remained calm. "Marcus, I think we've been working so hard lately," she said as she approached her husband. "Let's go out, go to the cinema like ordinary people. Tomorrow is the premiere of that comedy, remember?" "Marion, I'd love to, but I've already promised to go out of town with the guys. Nicholas bought a new car. He wants to celebrate." Marcus shrugged nonchalantly. "I know you don't like his company, so I didn't even invite you." Marion sighed. The excuse was flawless. She really didn't like Nicholas, her husband's mate. Considered him a slacker and a slob. "Oh, good. I'll go with Mum." "Since you're busy," she said with a strained smile. "I hope we all have a good time." Marcus smiled broadly, put his arm around her waist, and the two of them walked inside the restaurant. Dinners and breakfasts with Marion's mum were a nice tradition. It had started a long time ago, and over the years had grown from scrambled eggs and cocoa in the home kitchen to full-fledged trips to the most beautiful and interesting places. In fact, it was her mother who instilled a dislike for the catering industry and played a big part in who her daughter became. This time for dinner, Marion chose an Italian bistro with small cozy tables and clean tablecloths on the tables. They changed places often, but Marion had never invited her mother to her restaurants. She considered it a kind of bad luck. The time was drawing near. Mum still hadn't arrived. Marion looked outside the window for her yellow Mini Cooper, but she couldn't find it. Mum, despite her age of 64, was a vivacious, energetic, and peculiar lady. She retained a cute, childish devil in her, sprinkled with the wisdom of her years. The waiter put a kettle and cups in front of Marion and served her the cutlery. The telephone rang. "Marion, please forgive me. I won't be in." Mum's voice sounded with a note of regret. "The neighbor's dog is ill. She took her to the vet, and she asked me to babysit her granddaughter. You can't leave a small child unattended." "I'm sorry again, darling." "Well, if that's the way it is, what can I do?" sighed Marion. "Call Matthew and let him take over for me," suggested Mummy on the other end of the line. "I will," the woman agreed briefly. "I wish baby Cynthia well." "Bye, Mum." Marion hung up. It wasn't that she was upset, but something like that. That's what happens when you go to the shop for one thing and end up buying something else. or you don't get anything at all. The evening was originally supposed to be with her husband, then her mom. In the end, she's sitting alone at the table, waiting for something. The waiter put a dish of pizza on the table, wishing enjoy your meal. It was too late to leave, to refuse. Marian decided to enjoy her own company, looking out the window. Who would have thought that being a successful businesswoman and a married woman could feel so lonely? Good evening. I'm sorry to disturb you, but you look very much like a childhood friend of mine, she said suddenly. Marian turned round and saw that a vaguely familiar man was speaking to her. You look very much like my childhood friend, he laughed, recognizing her. She raised her eyebrows, but then smiled. Marian, I'm not mistaken, am I? Let me sit down. Of course, Norman, she nodded at the empty chair opposite. I remembered you right away. I've gone blind, the man commented. How long have we not seen each other? 20 years at least since you were transferred to the West Coast? And now I'm a retired cop, Norman said. I've decided to move closer to my historic homeland. How are you doing? It's been a long time. It's amazing. And the conversations and questions and discussions began, and surprised looks of disbelief and laughter. Marian grew up in the same yard with Norman. He was 2 years older than her. They spent their childhood climbing on other people's plots, building huts, baking potatoes over a fire, and dreaming of growing up. At school, Marian studied hard, and Norman took his lumps. Growing up, he left for the army by her graduation. Their friendship was always strong and unbreakable. Everyone in the yard knew that Marian could not be offended, whether in 1st grade or 10th grade, or Norman would quickly kick the offenders. There I studied in Washington and went to work in the police. Became an investigator, continued Norman's story. I saw a lot of things during that time. Now I'm here, and I'm thinking, what's a retired cop like you to do? It was written on your forehead that you'd go into uniform. I'm not even surprised, Marian grinned. Her mood had improved considerably. Seeing an old friend was a pleasant event, a spark of joy that was much needed. In that case, you should either bake pies or make others bake them, Norman answered in her tone of voice. Admit it, you have someone to boss around, don't you? Just 3 chefs, 24 waiters, and a modest restaurant business. Marian stirred her tea with her spoon. Wow, Norman was genuinely amazed. So we've both become what we wanted to be. It's working, agreed Marian. What's the matter? Norman noticed her distant look. Are you upset about something? She didn't want to complain about her idle suspicions, but the feeling of unease hadn't left her since that moment in the car. Eventually, the woman, choosing her words, described to her friend the object of her concern. Norman furrowed his brow, but then suddenly his face lit up with an idea. Let me watch your husband. There's plenty of time in retirement anyway. I'll get to know the city properly, he suggested casually. It's not right, Marian looked at the man doubtfully. What if he realizes he's being followed? Norman smiled broadly. You must have forgotten who I am. Surveillance and data collection have been my professional duties for many years. Norman tapped his finger on the table. And I'd like to point out that I perform them perfectly. I promise to keep it a secret from your husband. All right, Marian agreed with a sigh. I need a photo, data about the car and work, Norman dryly muttered, and then laughed, involuntarily making Marian laugh. Everything will be, comrade investigator, she replied. Can I just finish my dinner? She took the last piece of pizza from the plate. They chatted for a long time, ordered a second pot of tea, and then dessert. The planned dinner turned out not to be planned at all. By the end of the summer, Amanda was already imagining the bright prospects of a well-fed and prosperous life with Marcus. Like many girls from the provinces, she came to the capital to study, but she realized that she had chosen the wrong profession. So, according to her diploma, Amanda was a banker, but in fact she was engaged in the design of premises for various celebrations, mainly weddings. This occupation brought the girl not only good income, but also useful acquaintances, connections as a way to rise and enrich herself. Amanda began to perceive very quickly tales of love and happiness, and she squeamishly threw them into the rubbish bin. Who needed that love when money had long ago decided everything in the city? She had seen proof of this at the wedding she had designed, where girls married wealthy, settled and educated men, not caring about the depth of their feelings. There were exceptions, of course, but they were rare. Amanda believed that love would invariably appear if your husband had a good income and respect, and his looks were almost secondary. But no matter how much reason persuaded her, the urge for beauty came from deep within. So why did Amanda latch on to Marcus? Because she realized she'd hit the jackpot she'd always secretly dreamed of. She didn't care about wives, children, or any other circumstance. "Everyone survives as best they can," said the girl, like-minded to such a position found very quickly. At one of the weddings, Amanda met Rachel, one of the bridesmaids. The chatty, cheerful girl took a liking to Amanda, and soon they were spending time together. Rachel also came from the province and dreamed of successfully settling down at someone else's expense. However, so far all her arrangement was limited to working in a middle-class boutique and living at her aunt's house. Over time, the girl brought herself in order. But if the provincial traits Amanda managed to quickly get rid of, then Rachel did not succeed. They squeaked in her manners and conversation. That was why she attracted only those men who recognized the familiar traits, the same provincials and conquerors of the capital, living in hostels. Rachel was angry. Amanda laughed. She had better luck herself. Like any fishing trip, the big fish bite less often. Amanda didn't give up on the small ones. She quickly learned to distinguish really wealthy men from those who tried to be like them. In her 25 years, Amanda has already had experience of relationships with an official, the owner of a bath complex, a successful photographer, and a titled athlete. Only all relationships failed to bring to the cherished goal a ring on the finger. The official was also married. The businessman turned out to be a hardened bachelor. The photographer was taken away, and the athlete said that he would marry the girl whom his parents would approve. But Amanda was not upset. During the relationship, she managed to shake out of her beau status expensive gifts and other bonuses, jewelry, trips, connections, all of which proved useful later on. "It's time for your Marcus to hint at a holiday together," Rachel reasoned. "It's velvet season, and it's a good time to go to the seaside." "I agree," Amanda nodded. "I've been thinking about it." "What's to think about? You're already covered in presents." Rachel waved her hand pretentiously at her friend's jewelry. He gave her earrings, bought shoes, ordered a dress. "Have you been to all the decent places?" "What's the point? Let him take you somewhere to sunbathe." Amanda sat with Rachel on an elegant bench in the shade of the trees on the seafront. It was stuffy. Amanda flicked down a promotional booklet hastily grabbed by the promoter. Rachel wanted to offer something bigger and better. She'd been catching her friend's every word lately. Amanda was in a relationship with Marcus, a rich and handsome man. She wondered if Marcus would pull for something further away from Turkey. Rachel squinted up at the white clouds. "I'd ask him to go to the Maldives." "Do you think he should?" Amanda asked with a hint of doubt in her voice. "Of course, mate. You've been dating for 2 months. With his abilities, you'd think he'd have figured it out by now. He drives a Lexus, but he can't think of taking his girlfriend on holiday." Rachel tapped her forehead with a bent finger. "Would you enlighten him?" "Maybe you're right," Amanda said. "I'm tired. I want a change of scenery, to warm my bones, to tan without a tanning bed. And I've got a brand-name swimming costume lying around." "A friend wouldn't advise anything bad," Rachel said immediately. Marcus smoked, standing in the restaurant's patio. He needed to think. Amanda had suggested that they go on holiday together for 7 to 10 days. He had to come up with an excuse to explain it to his wife in a painless way. And he also had to think of where to get the extra money for the holiday. It was one thing to be away from home in the evening, or to give his mistress earrings, but it was another to slip away for a week on a holiday worth a couple of $100,000. 2 desires were fighting inside Marcus. One was pounding in his chest and packing a suitcase for the trip, urging him to spit on everything. The other was scrupulously calculating the consequences of such an act. Here would be divorced, and would have already taken girls around the world, and would not sit under anyone's heel. Resented the first desire. "Aha, divorced and left to finish the lump of butter. You should have told her to sign something over to you a long time ago," countered the second. Like many men in the world, Marcus wanted to chase two birds with one stone, to live a good life without trying too hard, and to date a beautiful mistress while having a wife. But as the years passed, the position of the second role began to weigh on him. Even a few people knew it. Their strained relationship with his wife Marion would have been noticed even by a blind man. "You can't get a divorce, Marcus," he muttered. "But no one else needs to know that but you. Well, the holiday adventure will have to be canceled and smoothed over." The man remembered that in September there were a lot of business and banquets planned in the restaurant for which he was responsible. Flying out at a time like this was as risky as possible. Marion might suspect something, but Marcus didn't want to quarrel with Amanda. "We'll find a compromise," he said, looking at his reflection in the glass doors and grinning. "A favorable one for my face, of course." Marion strolled leisurely down the hall of one of her 3 restaurants. She liked to observe the work, to approach the guests, to chat, to get into all the processes of daily life of the establishment, and of course quietly proud of the fact that everything that happens the fruit of her work. The woman, as if with awe and care, watched a growing child who brought her diplomas, A's and medals from school. From pleasant contemplation, Marion was distracted by a phone call. "Hello, Marion. I have a full report on the work done." Norman's voice was as casual as always, but at the same time tried to hide something. "Hello, Norman." Marion's heart was thumping under her shirt. "Do you want to discuss this now?" "I think I do," Norman said with a strained sigh. "The information is curious. I mean, if it's what I think it is. I'm parked around here, on the corner of the street." "Okay, I'll be right there." Marion hung up the phone. There was an unpleasant tightness in her chest. A sweat ran down her back. Why had she even agreed to this venture, knowing what might come out? Probably didn't want to believe it. Or was she afraid? Ridiculous in her position. Marion pulled herself together, clenched her hands into fists, exhaled, and pushed open the door to the street. She found Norman in the car. He was thoughtfully studying something on his smartphone screen. When Marion got into the passenger seat, the man put the device on his knee with the screen down. "Let's not make ourselves scarce," Norman began without ceremony. "I hadn't been watching Marcus constantly for a month, but what I had seen and recorded was enough." He lowered his hand and picked up the smartphone. Marion's face stretched. "Here," Norman said and handed it to her, switching on the screen. The photo that opened showed Marcus sitting in a cafe with a young brunette, in a very unfriendly way, and whispering something in her ear. "Leaf to the side," Norman prompted. Marion lifted her hand and ran an icy finger across the screen. In the next shot, Marcus was kissing the same girl in his car. The photo was taken through the windscreen, but the ex-cop's professional hand caught the shot, so there was no doubt who was in it. Then there were several more pictures, but they all spoke eloquently about the same thing. "A mistress," said Marion, in a voice that was not her own. That was the truth I refused to believe. "I'm sorry, Marion," Norman said, putting a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I've tried to remain impartial at times like this, but I can't. You're not just another person with a statement and a new case opening." "Who is she? Did you recognize her?" Of course, Norman opened a folder of other photos on his smartphone and began flipping through them in front of her. Amanda. 25 years old, commuter, works as a wedding decorator. Also a professional seductress in the capital, trapping wealthy men in her net. Marion scrutinized her rival's photo. Slim, long hair, blue eyes, stylish clothes, the complete opposite of her. And young. "How long have they been at it?" she asked, pulling herself together again. "According to my observations, a little more than 2 months," said Norman. "The motive is more than clear. They need money." And the rich uncle. Norman hesitated, searching for words. "You don't have to be delicate," Marion cut him off. "I want someone young and beautiful. I have long ago, somewhere in the depths of my soul, realized that cannot be such a handsome as Marcus be with me because of great love. I'm not stupid either, and I understand what attracted him in the first place. But it didn't stop me from loving him." You should have. Marion's lips quivered. Her eyes, hardened by labor and work, were filled with tears. A woman's heart remains a woman's heart, and the pain is felt through all the walls. Marion wiped away the returning tears with her hand and sniffed her nose. Norman involuntarily tried to comfort her. And your hubby is a disgrace, almost an Alfonso. Don't blame yourself for anything. Besides, that's not all I found out. Marion stared at him in amazement. How not everything? Like this, Norman moved his eyebrows conspiratorially. It seems that both lovers play their own game and think that no one knows anything. As a matter of fact, they do. Only I laughed when I realized what was going on. Marion looked at him perplexed. Instead of explaining, Norman showed her something on his smartphone again. I don't understand, she scrutinized the picture. There are two of them. Her brow furrowed. That's what I didn't realize at first, Norman nodded. Your husband seems to want to do everything at once. He leaned towards her and began to explain something, flexing his fingers and drawing abstract diagrams in the air. And Marion laughed. Absurd and silly and totally inappropriate. But she laughed. What am I to do in this situation? After all her deliberations, she asked the ex-investigator a question. Behave as usual, unperturbed, Norman said. Let everything go on as it is, and I will continue to collect information so that you can finish everything nicely at the end. I hope, by the way, you're not thinking of forgiving? Absolutely not, Marion shook her head emphatically. I'd finally faced my fear, and I didn't intend to depend on it. This is my Marion. Norman clapped his hands together. I'll send you all the pictures, but just don't have a showdown before then. He's an arsehole, I know, but it's got to be done. You don't legally lose anything in the divorce, right? And he's going to get almost nothing. So let's at least give him one last punch in the nose for the sake of justice. Norman gave Marion a friendly hug and shook her gently. The woman pulled herself together, smiled, thanked her friend for his help, and got out of the car. Why don't we fly? Amanda wrinkled her nose capriciously. Marcus sat opposite her in a soft armchair on the terrace of a trendy bistro. Boats and ships cruised along the river nearby. The breeze brought coolness from the water's surface. You see, it's September. I can't just drop everything and fly away. Marcus showed her a list of restaurant reservations for the month ahead. I can't right now, but I promise that we'll revisit this issue in the future. I'm already in the mood for the sea and the sun. Amanda continued to be capricious out of principle, although she understood perfectly well the real reason for her lover's refusal to travel. His wife was preventing them from enjoying their holiday and each other. Marcus could talk as much as he wanted about being busy, about plans, but for the first time his lover's wife began to irritate Amanda. She was no longer satisfied with the gifts and time. She wanted to own it. Rachel had warned her friend about this so constantly. As long as he is married to someone else, dearie, you can only dream of a well-fed and comfortable life, she said. We must make room for you soon. I brought you something to brighten up the situation. Marcus reached into his pocket. He placed a beautiful box on the table and nodded invitingly, offering to open it. Amanda took the gift in her hands with interest and found a ring with a large transparent stone in the box. Is it a diamond? She gazed at the jewel playing with its facets in the sunlight. So be it, Marcus smiled, satisfied, contemplating the girl's joy and delight at the gift. And he loved the feeling. He fed off of it. So you're proposing to me? Amanda slipped the ring onto the ring finger of her right hand. Suppose so, Marcus smiled enigmatically, folding his hands on his stomach. But you're still married. Amanda looked at him ingratiatingly. I know. I promise that I will solve this issue, Marcus answered evasively and at the same time confidently. Amanda seemed to be satisfied with this answer because she was admiring the stone in the ring and had already sent several pictures to her friend in the chat room. Of course, it was foolish not to show off such a gift. Marcus realized that it was impossible to delay the moment forever. Divorce from Marion would be unprofitable for him in every sense. So sooner or later the affair with Amanda had to come to an end, if she didn't eventually swallow the fact of his marriage. Amanda looked charming, but calculating. Oh, and Marcus understood why many of their plans were falling apart because of Marion. Anyone would be annoyed by that. That evening, Amanda walked home from practice with her gym bag slung over her shoulder, chatting with Rachel on the phone. She was steadily praising the ring and marveling at Marcus's impeccable taste. Had he clearly told you he was getting a divorce? She asked. Almost, Amanda confirmed. Almost mate doesn't count, Rachel pointed out. It's either a clear answer or he's leading you on. No dates, no plan of action. What is this? Are you suggesting we brainwash him with that question every time we meet? Amanda bent over to tie her shoelaces. I'm suggesting that you go to his wife and put an end to their family history, Rachel said. Otherwise it'll be like that politician. Let your Marcus grumble, but after that divorce is inevitable. Cut to the chase, Amanda grinned doubtfully. She'd never done that, but she'd replayed the same scenario in her mind more than once. Yes, of course we should cut it down, Rachel said eagerly. There's no other way out of this. We can go together. No, that's my man. Who would I be afraid of, Rachel? Amanda remembered Marcus's unattractive common-law wife. An old gray mouse? No way. A few sentences would be enough to make her cry. I still don't understand what keeps them together. Beautiful people should be with beautiful people. It's about time. A friend supported Amanda's decision to go and claim hers from someone who clearly got it by mistake. Ending these loud speeches with mutual laughter, the girls said goodbye already on the doorstep of Amanda's house. She took a quick shower in a belligerent mood, and at the same time thought about what to wear to her lover's wife to emphasize the difference between them even more. The doorbell rang in the afternoon. She had decided to work from home that day, and had been sitting at her laptop in the kitchen since morning. Marcus had left to prepare a big banquet, and wasn't due back yet. Mom hadn't warned him about the visit. She wasn't expecting a courier either. Marian set the laptop aside and stretched the leg she was sitting on. Businesslike and collected at home, she sometimes allowed herself to relax, wearing comfortable trousers and a t-shirt from her home kit. The woman finished her cool tea as she walked and headed for the front door. Behind the door, someone was pressing the bell button insistently. Husband's mistress. Did she miss my husband not believing her own eyes? Unpleasant goosebumps ran down her neck. Her tongue felt like it was stuck to her palate. The woman took another careful look through the peephole. Yes, it is. Standing in the stairwell was exactly the girl from the photographs Norman had provided her. Marian took a deep breath, then exhaled and grasped the handle. A childish thought flashed through her mind. Why don't I pretend no one's home? But the woman quickly pushed it away. Behind a metallic sound, the door opened. Their gazes met. In those couple of seconds, an experienced observer would have read contempt, disdain and squeamishness in the eyes of one, and vague interest, incomprehension and strange restraint in the eyes of the other. Hello, Marian. Amanda gave her a determined look. I won't beat around the bush and tell you straight away. Your husband and I love each other. That's a fact. He doesn't love you. That's also a fact. So let him off the hook and give him a divorce. Marian overcame the initial wave of uncertainty and rested her shoulder against the door jamb. She eyed her rival. Amanda had come in full dress and makeup, clearly wanting to emphasize her youth and beauty. Marian remembered the executive course. In her mind, the image of her mistress was replaced by the image of a girl who had come to apply for a job. The switch worked, Marian said in a calm voice. Hello, Amanda. I agree with the second fact as I have known it for some time now. But I would argue with the first one. My husband knows how to love only himself. Amanda's eyes flashed with surprise. The gray mouse wife was not so quiet that she should have immediately fallen in front of her. He knows her name from somewhere. You're no match for him anyway. We both realized that Amanda put the mask of confidence back on her face. He's young, handsome, successful. He needs to have a woman like that by his side who will make him happy. Give him a divorce. Marian realized that the moment of the flick on the nose that Norman was talking about had arrived. Who says I won't? She said, looking intently at her rival, which clearly threw her off her guard. You can have Marcus right now. I'll even let you into the flat to collect his suitcases. Marian stepped back and waved invitingly down the corridor. Amanda hesitated in her mind. The gray mouse should be crying by now. Just keep in mind that you're not getting anything. The restaurant business is mine. This flat was bought before the marriage by me, and even the car that dear Marcus used to dust you in the eye belongs to me as well. No, if such a great love, then I dare not prevent, as they say, with the beloved anywhere. Marian shrugged her shoulders. So be it. I'll leave him to work as a waiter in my restaurant. Amanda was dumbfounded. The well-calibrated plan in her head crumbled like a house of cards. She backed away from the door. Marion pulled her phone out of her pocket. Here's the final proof that Marcus only loves himself. You wanted to make a fool of me, but you made a fool of yourself. She turned the phone to a dumbfounded Amanda. She stared at the screen and saw a familiar entrance, a familiar car, and all too familiar people in the photo. The picture showed Marcus kissing Rachel outside her house. Amanda stared at Marion with a wild stare and began frantically pressing the lift button. It was like the tossing of a grasshopper planted in a glass jar in the midday sun. All confidence, maneuverability, and feline grace vanished as she realized what a foolish position she was in. At last the lift opened its doors and the girl disappeared into it. Marion gave her a triumphant glance. Now it was no longer possible to pretend. One could cast off the beautiful and ungrateful guise. Let such happiness go to another. And she and Marion did not need it for nothing. It was only in the taxi that Amanda realized how cleverly she had been tricked. One of them was careful to create the appearance of someone else's wealth. The other was talking teeth, pushing her in the right direction. Anger, shame, resentment, and a dozen other feelings were boiling inside, forming a dangerous mixture. Even the taxi driver seemed to sense it and drove in silence. Amanda jumped out of the car in the driveway of Rachel's house. She didn't know why she had come here, what she wanted to see or find out. Looking around, she saw a painfully familiar car. The girl purposely did not call the intercom and slipped into the entrance following one of her neighbors. She went up to the third floor and again, as an hour ago, began to press the bell button. There was a commotion behind the door. A couple of minutes later, it was opened by a disheveled Rachel in her dressing gown. "Where is he?" Amanda pushed her away and walked unceremoniously into the flat with her shoes on. "Are you drunk?" "Who?" Rachel twisted her finger at her temple. Instead of answering, Amanda stared wildly at her and started pulling curtains and opening cupboards. Rachel started grabbing her arms. "Are you insane? Stop it. What is this circus?" she shouted. "You tell me what kind of circus you're having with me as a clown." Amanda reached the old-fashioned tall wardrobe in the room and swung the doors open. There was the same silence, the pinching pause when you hear a fly fly in an empty room. Among the clothes racks, holding his shoes and trousers, Marcus stood staring at his two former girlfriends. The look caught him off guard, like a Chinese spy. "You traitor." Amanda grabbed Norman by the ear and pulled him into the room. Marcus squeaked and didn't even bother to defend himself. Collapsed to the floor weightily and awkwardly. Then he got up, covering his face from the blows his angry mistress threw at him. The situation was worthy of an anecdote, a bad anecdote. Amanda stared furiously first at her former suitor, and then at her ex-girlfriend. "How? Why are you doing this to me? And why does everything always go to you?" Rachel flared up suddenly and brightly. "All the plushies, all the handsome guys, all the best choices, and all I do is pick up the leftovers in the form of stories about your gifts and romances. Learn to share, mate." Amanda was speechless. The one she'd trusted with all her secrets, ideas and secrets, was a sneaky rat. "Now I understand everything." She clapped her hands together slowly. "You deliberately persuaded me to raise my demands in the hope that Marcus would think twice and leave such a dear girl. And I, like an idiot, believed it out of a sense of self-importance. And you sent me to his wife to make a fool of myself. And then you'd come to me ready to go. You're not so stupid, are you?" Rachel said sarcastically. "I may not be that pretty, but I can not only wear expensive shoes and another ring, but also be a real person. Listen to problems, give advice. And you're a plastic doll, soulless and fake." Amanda almost physically felt that she was spat in the face, not fully realizing what she was doing. She jumped up and slapped Rachel, echoing in the corners of the room. Her head rattled like an empty saucepan. Under the noise of the quarrel, the rivals did not even notice how the heroic instigator of the whole mess quietly slipped out of the flat through the locked door. Without conspiring, they rushed to the window and only had time to see the rear bumper of a familiar Lexus. Marcus was in for a surprise at home, too. He had time to stop at a restaurant, clean himself up, and take a new suit from the rack in his office, so that nothing would remind him of the disgraceful position he was in today. The adventurism and danger that were invariably present in the situation he had created stirred the blood. 2 mistress friends, one of whom knew nothing, and a rich wife. Such an intricate weave would have been the envy of Shakespeare himself. Rachel herself wrote to Marcus on social media and offered to meet. Amanda had shown her his profile so often that it wasn't hard to remember and find the man afterwards. Rachel didn't ask to take her to expensive restaurants, didn't ask for gifts, but really knew how to listen. The more Amanda asked, the more Marcus liked Rachel. And at some point he decided, why choose someone when you can be with all of them at once? One for money, one for cozy evenings, one for going out and maintaining his status. Why not live? Marcus drove home, hoping to take a break from the situation he'd gotten himself into. But today wasn't over yet. I got off early, the man said loudly, slamming the front door of the house. At home, the woman said. I'm so tired. He walked into the room, rubbing his forehead diligently. Tired of having to decide which of the 2 mistresses to choose. Marian looked at her husband in the armchair. Marcus faltered. He felt as if he had been doused with ice water. He tried to say something, but only incoherent words came out. I was working ... Min. Are you delirious? Instead of answering, the woman rose from her chair and threw a stack of photos at her husband, alternating between Amanda and Rachel. Marcus stared dumbly at the pictures scattered across the parquet. Did you think you were the smartest? Marian stepped close to her husband. I guess you don't know the proverb about the well. Marcus only stared at her in silence, gradually realizing how he was in trouble. Until tomorrow, please disappear from my flat. And by the way, I've already found a new manager. If you're happy being a waiter, you can stay. If you're not, you're out of here. I don't want a traitorous, cheating Alfonso husband. Marian turned back to the window. Marian, let's talk, began Marcus. His wife interrupted him. Get out now. Only you leave the car keys here. Otherwise, I'm filing a theft complaint. Marcus realized that he had overplayed himself. The chest of plenty was a trap not to be trifled with. Humiliated by his own bad tendencies, he tried to pack his things. Excuses were pointless. He considered staying with one of his mistresses, but realized Amanda wouldn't forgive. And Rachel? She didn't really need him. More likely, she just wanted to rub her friend's nose in it. Marcus felt used and worthless. Marian heard him leave the drawing room. She felt that she had won, but first of all, she admitted to herself what she had been afraid of and had been careful not to notice. It was as if a dirty film had been pulled out of her mind, and a bright, clear light appeared from there. The first snow was falling on the city, covering pavements, roofs, trees with a thin veil, landing on fluffy coats and red noses, hiding in bushes or settling on the tongues of curious children. Marian hurried to the meeting. They had not seen Norman since September. He had left in a hurry then to stay with his elder sister in Murray to look after her nephews while she recovered from a broken leg. So this morning an old friend had written to her and asked her to meet. Marian was catching up on her driving skills. Although she could drive, she preferred to take a taxi or rely on her ex-husband's driving skills. Now the woman was determined to drive herself. Norman had chosen a simple diner, where a full woman in an old apron was frying chips and juicy chibareks smoked behind the cashier in the open kitchen. This place reminds me of my grandmother's kitchen, Marian said, looking round with interest as she and Norman met and talked. That's the same reason I chose it, the former investigator smiled, following her gaze. Just like when I was a kid. Shall we drop the formalities and order ourselves a terribly greasy, unflavored and hot chibarek? Come on, Marian nodded in agreement. 10 minutes later, they were both eating their orders. The chibarets were steaming and splattered with juice, but no one seemed to mind. Marian got her hands dirty, but she couldn't remember the last time she'd felt so easy and good with someone. Even the owner of a restaurant chain is entitled to little transgressions in the form of plain, old-fashioned chibarets. My sister has woods like this near Murray. It's fabulous for cross-country skiing, Norman said, wiping his hands with a napkin. I remember when you were a kid, you used to love to run like this. When I was a kid, there was more snow and more frost, said Marian. But you're right. I'd love to get away from here for a day in the woods. So you'd like to go already? Norman asked excitedly. I think the restaurants will work without my supervision for a couple of days, Marion said. And I need to drive not only in the city, but also on the motorway. It's a skill that only comes with practice. We can go tonight. What's the use of stalling, right? Norman winked at her. Marion pressed her lips together, getting her point right. Would it be a friendly trip for warm memories, or a romantic journey with the hope of something more? Norman smiled with the corners of his lips, wrinkles gathering in the corners of his eyes. That's for you to decide, the man replied. After a pause, she said, let it be the second. Norman's hand covered her fingers on the table reverently, confidently, and yet gently. Marion thought that another chapter in her life was beginning, but in a new book. Returning early from a business trip, Catherine went to take out the rubbish, and after overhearing her mother-in-law's conversation. Well, ladies, it turns out a trip to LA is all it takes, one person at a time. So who wants to go for a ride? Seated in an impressive leather chair, quite a young man looked around the 3 female employees sitting in front of him. According to my preliminary calculations, the business trip can drag on for a working week. It will hardly take more time to sort everything out. I advise you to leave on Sunday to be there on Monday and start work at once. The silence in the office was broken only by the cheerful tune of a song from the speakers about the grandmother who is feared and respected by all the pirates in the world. The man was tapping his fingers on the lacquered surface of the table to the beat of the cheerful rhythm, hurrying his subordinates. Well, I'm listening to suggestions from the willing. Betty, how about a business trip? Winston, I cannot, said the brunette with a stylish haircut. It's my son's birthday next week. His first big one is his 10th birthday. I'd like to celebrate it with him, of course. So I can't. One good reason. Emma, would you like a ride? The pretty blonde shook her luxurious curls, shook her head negatively and said, why bother? Catherine is from Los Angeles. Let her go. I think it's a great option. Exactly, Winston. Another blonde with straight hair supported the idea. Nastia's idea was a great one. Who else but Catherine to send there? So to speak, to combine useful with pleasant nostalgia and meeting with relatives and acquaintances. Well done, Emma. Great idea. The author of the idea smiled modestly, looked at her boss with a certain degree of coquetry, and thanked her colleague, thank you, Maggie, for appreciating it. Right, the man nodded. The only thing left to do is to put Catherine herself on notice. By the way, why isn't she at the meeting? So you sent her to the supplier, so that she still sold the introduction of a few points in the annex to the contract? For her colleague stood up for the bright, resourceful Emma. She'll probably be here soon. Indeed, almost as Emma finished speaking, there was a knock at the door. And after Winston's loudly voiced permission, a ruddy brown woman with long hair and a high ponytail entered the office. The woman sat down at the table with her colleagues, handed the boss a folder with documents, and explained, sorry it took so long. I got caught in a traffic jam on the way back. The boss nodded his head approvingly, having studied the document she had brought, and then without any preamble announced, Catherine, get ready for the road. You are waiting for a business trip to your hometown for about a week. I think there are no objections. Catherine shrugged her shoulders, saying that it was necessary, and began to specify to the chief the tasks to be solved on the business trip. Winston let the other women go to their workplaces and began to tell everything in detail to the subordinate who remained in the office. The pretty provincial girl was far from stupid, and it did not take much time to explain all the nuances. Having finished the story about the purpose of the business trip, the boss suggested, if it will be necessary to delay, then no problem. The main thing is that everything should be solved. In case something goes wrong, call, right? Okay, I will not delay any longer. Go to draw up the papers. Catherine realized that her jealous husband Michael would not be delighted that she would be away for a week on a business trip. Yes, and she, hand on heart, the upcoming trip to the city, where they spent their childhood and youth, caused ambivalent emotions. Of course, it would be nice to see her relatives, but this trip could bring her a burdensome reunion. There, in Los Angeles, Catherine had once experienced a great disappointment. Though to be fair, few people's first loves turn out to be happy ones. She was no exception. It was heartbreak that pushed the suffering girl to make a grand change in her life. She decided to leave her town, and that the most important reason pushing her to strive away was her classmate Bill. She did not tell even her own mother. In fact, what was there to talk about? She'd had a crush on him a few times during her senior year. 8 times, to be exact. Catherine remembered that number even after many years. They had slow danced at the school discos. They walked around the city, on which the enchanting twilight was descending. And Bill was humming a hit song by popular vocalists. "Catherine, get the phone. It's him calling the girl in love," said to herself. From Catherine's point of view, Bill was much more beautiful than all the popular musicians. Compared to him, these performers seemed somehow too feminine. It was Bill's short haircut, broad-shouldered, with sharply defined cheekbones and a massive chin, which thanks to the dimples seemed especially touching to the girl. Dark brown eyes looked, it seemed, directly into the heart and easily discerned the feelings of love Catherine. The girl then herself fantasized that Bill the happiness of her life, and they will always be together. Except that the guy was looking for a more favorable option, and without much difficulty found. In fact, he didn't have to go far. And who did he choose? Nasty, arrogant Gwen Samova, shrouded in some incredibly intrusive perfume. Their classmate who so boastfully reported that her fragrance was a Chanel original. Allegedly, she had bought the perfume in Paris itself, where she had flown with her parents for her 16th birthday. Catherine almost instantly knew that Bill began to meet with Gwen from the denim jacket favorite smelled of another's fragrance. And the girl frankly asked, "What's going on, Bill?" "At least for honesty, thank you." Twisted did not become and said that he has with Gwen some off kind of romance, but with Catherine he would be happy to meet secretly. Catherine took it as the most brazen treason, especially when it became known that Gwen's father, a local businessman, took the guy to work for him. Unofficially, of course, and also promised through acquaintances to release from the army and give a car. And the man explained without hints that all this is done in view of the fact that his beloved daughter will soon change her surname to Bill's surname. Bill himself told a friend about it, and the latter told the information to another friend. So the news traveled further around the city and reached Catherine. It was obvious to the girl that her handsome lover sold out. No doubt, his price was not so small by the standards of their city, but Bill's cynicism was especially hurtful. It was not out of love that he had defected to another woman, but only for selfish reasons, and tried to keep himself entertained in the form of Catherine. It was painful, disgusting, and offensive. The girl realized that if she agreed, Bill would go from hints of intimacy to demands like proving the depth of her feelings. Well, no, and she couldn't even dream of playing the low honor role of an alternate airfield, or rather even a simulator. The pain of betrayal was too strong, and she did not want to see the self-serving and amorous Bill anymore. Aloud, the girl, masking her feelings, explained to her parents that she wanted to try her luck in the capital. Close people discouraged Catherine, too bold and unjustified, from their point of view, the deed. The girl was warned about the dangers and frightened by the complexity of life in a huge metropolis. But surprisingly, everything turned out quite well. The provincial, as it sometimes happens, was just lucky. She found a job and met a man who managed to melt the ice in her heart. Michael was 7 years older than Catherine, had already graduated from university, and held a normal position in a large concern. She only a few months moved to the capital and was able to get a job in a coffee shop for 2 positions, barista and cleaner. Michael, obeying a quirky twist of fate, ran into the place, fleeing from the pouring rain that had caught him by surprise. During the time that the man was experiencing the elements, he had time to appreciate the attractiveness and good-naturedness of the young girl, who seemed to be genuinely pleased with every visitor to the coffee shop. In addition, she had proper speech, which, as his mother Vivian always reminded the man, was the first sign of a well-mannered person. After the rain had finished its wet work, leaving behind shiny pavements and puddles, Michael, getting ready to leave, asked Catherine, "Do you know her phone number?" And Catherine, to his surprise, did not flirt or force herself to beg. The girl liked a man who did not make silly hints and behaved calmly and without fuss. From the first date, Michael swiftly swirled provincial in a whirlpool of courtship, and his sincerity dispelled the doubts that appeared in the head of Catherine. It was the man persuaded her to leave the coffee shop and get an office job in the company of his former classmate, who got a high position thanks to kinship with the CEO. Somewhat jokingly, Michael explained. Stephen and I are good friends. I trust him completely, and he'll look after you and won't let you down. So I can be sure of that. All the affairs and office romances will avoid you. Catherine took Michael's words for a joke. She had no idea that he is so jealous possessive. Only later, already married to him, she realized the man really cared that she kept him faithful. And as Caesar's proverbial wife, she had to be above suspicion. Michael had somehow very quickly introduced the girl to his mother, and Vivian had received her favorably. The woman did not seem to be embarrassed by the fact that the chosen son of the newcomers, and that the education of the provincial beauty is only 11 grades. In general, she just did not think that Catherine so conquer-picky Michael that he will intend to marry. However, that's exactly what happened. Vivian understood perfectly well if she started to dissuade her son, and the relationship with him could be very badly damaged. Catherine's parents were also in some perplexity when just 6 months after moving to the capital, she announced to them that she was going to marry. Mom had gently clarified on the likelihood of becoming a grandmother soon. But the daughter was sure of the fallacy of this assumption. Wedding lovers decided not to arrange a wedding, but after the marriage they traveled to her hometown and had a hearty sit in a cafe on the seafront. Vivian, to go to get acquainted with the parents of her daughter-in-law, refused, referring to high blood pressure. Michael's father, who left the family soon after his son's adulthood and remarried, also got away with transferring money to the card as a wedding present, and in the province did not go. Catherine's parents fully approved of the son-in-law, and the young wife was completely happy. Life seemed like a magical fairy tale. Luck accompanied absolutely everything. In the capital, provincial, almost without making any effort, received in love and work. Perhaps some other woman, and would be embarrassed by the need to live in a flat with her mother-in-law. But Catherine was not afraid. She believed that for the sake of her loved one, will be able to find a common language with anyone. Especially since Vivienne, for all the time of acquaintance, showed herself only as an adequate, sensible woman. With the birth of children, the newlyweds decided not to hurry. They lived amicably, gradually saved up for a mortgage payment, and invested in the repair of Vivienne's flat. Contrary to popular prejudice, the two mistresses' mother-in-law and daughter-in-law quite peacefully interacted in the same kitchen, and they had neither quarrels nor discontent. Listening to the complaints of married colleagues about the parents of their husbands, Catherine only quietly rejoiced that she was once again incredibly lucky. True, to call Vivienne mum, she still did not dare even 7 years after the wedding. However, her mother-in-law did not insist on this relative title. She didn't give any indication that she was uncomfortable with her daughter-in-law calling her by her first name and patronymic. Everything was fine with everyone, and Michael was especially pleased. Mom and his wife didn't try to compete for his attention, and the atmosphere in the flat was really cozy and pleasant. In the evening after dinner, Catherine told her husband that she would have to leave for a week on a business trip, and Michael was visibly upset. "What's the big deal? Are you the one they decided to send? Are there no other female employees? He knows very well my attitude to your traveling." Catherine tried to calm her husband. "Or who else, except for me, can be sent to Los Angeles? I do not even have to rent a hotel. My parents will probably be happy to take me in, so don't worry about it. Understand, I too cannot abuse the fact that my immediate boss is your mate, and on this basis to refuse long-distance travel on business matters. Besides, don't you trust me?" Michael was embarrassed. He realized that his wife's business trip posed no threat to the marriage. But even after so many years since their marriage, he did not want to endure a long separation. Reluctantly, he confessed, "Not at all. Of course, I trust you and understand in my mind. Meeting your parents is a very nice bonus in this business trip. It's just that I'm going to miss you." Vivian, who lately had been coming home from work much later than the young people, as she called her son and daughter-in-law, caught a perfect picture in the kitchen. Catherine and Michael were sitting on the sofa, cuddled together. Baron, the elderly cat, was snoozing next to them. Fed up and content with his fate, the daughter-in-law noticed her mother-in-law and began to nimbly set the table, explaining, "Michael and I have already eaten. Now I'll set the table for you and we'll all drink tea together." The mistress patted the sleeping pet on the head, heard his satisfied purr, and went to wash her hands and change her clothes. Soon Vivienne was happily eating her dinner and only nodded in response to the news that her sister-in-law was soon traveling on a business trip. Although the mother-in-law at first glance behaved as usual, but Catherine noticed that mentally the woman as if she was somewhere far away, and even did not reproach the cat for his laziness and ignoring her appearance in the flat. However, there was no time to think about it too closely. It was necessary to get ready for the road. Vivienne, seeing her sister-in-law off, sent verbal greetings to her parents. She seemed to be behaving as usual. Catherine calmed down and put out of her mind thoughts about the strange behavior of her mother-in-law. Ahead of them awaited their hometown. Houston Airport, on some strange whim called Hobby, although the namesake settlement was not the nearest, met Catherine familiar bustle. Refusing the offers of annoying taxi drivers, expecting to profit from the fatigue and haste of air travelers, the woman went to the bus stop. "It's all right, I'll take a ride without much comfort. I'm not a lady. But I will save money, which, as it is well known, is not superfluous," she thought. Catherine did not warn her parents about her arrival, so as not to cause unnecessary trouble. She was well aware that otherwise her mother would have prepared food. As for the wedding, every time she drove up to her home, the young woman felt an inexpressible sense of anticipation. Joyful encounters were mixed with both happy and sad memories, and as a result her heart began to beat a little faster. The light in the kitchen window made me realize that my relatives were already home. And opening the door of her parents' flat with her key, Catherine announced loudly, "Hello, everyone." After the turmoil of the meeting a little subsided, Mum gently asked Catherine, "Daughter, did you come alone at all, or will your husband come later? Everything is all right with you and Michael?" Catherine hurried to reassure her mother. "Everything is fine. Just, I was unexpectedly sent on a business trip. Just a few hours, and here I am." Parents were happy with the unexpected visit of their daughter, but there was a circumstance that marred the meeting. Mum had a confession. "Catherine, we're going to the sanatorium on Wednesday. It's a bit sudden. We didn't think you'd come to visit." The woman thought for a few seconds and turned to her husband. "Father, let's give the vouchers to someone. We train tickets, perhaps, can still be folded." Catherine was indignant. "No, Mum, do not because of me to change your plans. Especially since I'll be traveling back and forth for work. Most likely I will come only at night. So don't worry, these days will be enough time for us to exchange all the news. It's okay." Mum, hugging her daughter tightly, whispered, "Okay, you got it. Again, let's believe that everything that is done is for the best." The trip was indeed little like a holiday. Catherine, as expected, left home in the morning and returned only in the evening. Only on the day of her parents' departure did she make an exception to her busy schedule. The woman insisted on taking a taxi to the railway station to see her parents off. Only then did she go to deal with work matters. As a result, it was necessary to hurry, and by evening Catherine was incredibly tired. She was approaching the house, wishing she were in the bathtub with the foam of molded shampoo, when behind her a familiar voice sang a line from a song that had long gone out of fashion. The woman turned around, feeling nothing but annoyance, and said hello. "Hello, Bill. Wow, what an old song, do you remember?" A grown-up Bill showered the former classmate with compliments. "But Catherine, I'm delighted. You're even more gorgeous now. You used to be pretty, but now you're just classy. You know, that's the influence of the capital. You're a classy little thing." While the man who once broke her heart, but unwittingly contributed to the discovery of happiness, wasted flattering phrases. Catherine studied him carefully. That's what surprising no punishment from the fate of the former catcher did not fly. The past years have not spoiled Bill, even on the contrary. It was as if he even became even more masculine, and his self-confidence and apparent financial well-being made him truly irresistible, at least in his own eyes. "Well, Catherine, why don't you say something? Aren't you glad to see me?" It came to Catherine. "Look, Gwen's spending the night with the kids at her parents' tonight. Oh yeah, you probably don't know. We have a 2-year-old son and a 3-month-old daughter. Can you congratulate me?" "Congratulations," Catherine said without much emotion. In fact, she did not care what was going on in the life of the man she used to be crazy about. However, Bill continued the offensive. "Listen, Catherine, shall we go to my place now? We'll celebrate. We'll sit and talk. We'll reminisce about our childhood romance. Remember how we used to hold hands, walk, and dream. Now, maybe we'll pick up where we left off in an adult way." "Did you hear the capital one? Haha. Lena got herself a fiancé. Good for her. Why did she come alone now? Or her husband is probably just busy making money, and you don't have time to be pampered. I'll fix everything. Why so beautiful?" Catherine actually became disgusted almost to the point of actual nausea. What she absolutely did not want to do was talk to Bill. Without even trying to appear polite, she sent her former classmate on a long journey. "Go back to your farm to catch butterflies, Bill. You've got my blessing to go all the way. Keep going and don't stop." A contemptuous phrase with stretched vowels followed the woman, who turned sharply and walked towards her driveway. Cocky. But Catherine was not going to react to this invective. Let Bill say whatever he wanted now. Neither he himself nor his impressive appearance no longer had any power over her and did not cause neither nostalgia nor bitterness. It was delightful to shake off the weight of resentment against the past, to reward herself with a welcome rest in the bath. Catherine was encouraged. The work was progressing better than expected, and there was hope to finish the trip ahead of schedule. The woman missed her husband very much. In addition, in his hometown there was nothing and no one that, or who could delay her. Indeed, everything was done ahead of schedule, and already after lunch on Thursday, Catherine ordered tickets for the next flight to the capital. The woman got out of her parents' flat and headed for Washington. Surprisingly, for some reason the return journey seemed shorter to her. Although it was quite late, there was no one in the capital's flat, except for the furry baron. It seemed that both Michael and Vivian had been working late, and the pet was hungry. Calling Meows, the cat persistently led the way into the kitchen. "What, Barosha hasn't eaten in a while, has he?" Catherine asked with a smile, not hoping for an answer. However, the cat, as if realizing what was being said to him, replied with a long meow and, looking back at the woman, continued towards the kitchen. Catherine poured dry food for the extortionist, refreshed the water in the bowl, and unwittingly noticed the overflowing bin. Its contents exuded unpleasant odors that made her wrinkle her nose in squeamishness. The woman was glad she hadn't had time to change her clothes yet, carefully pulled out the bag and headed for the bins in the yard. The light from the streetlights was enough to keep her from stumbling, and soon the woman reached her destination. She was about to swing around and throw the rubbish out when she heard voices just beyond the metal sheet blocking the bins from the tarmac path. One of them was very familiar to Catherine. She listened more closely. There was no doubt about it, her mother-in-law Vivian was talking to someone, unaware that her daughter-in-law was a few meters away. It was an anecdotal situation. Catherine wanted to quietly withdraw, but suddenly heard her mother-in-law say her name. Banal became curious. And when curbed herself for curiosity, the daughter-in-law stayed where she was. What Vivienne was saying was definitely not meant for her ears. Catherine is away on a business trip, but judging by the lights in the windows, Michael is already home. If it weren't for that, I'd certainly love to have you over for a visit. In response to this sounded a deep, ingratiating male voice, which was completely unfamiliar to Catherine. "Honey, but you do realize that at our age and all sorts of rented corners to hide to is not an option. And unhygienic it. I don't know who's been there before. I wish you nothing but the best. And I'm so embarrassed I can't offer you my own flat. You know I left everything to my wife and son after the divorce. And now I have to take the woman I love to the slums. I'm incredibly ashamed of this situation. I'm in awe of you. It's more than love, it's worship. You are a true goddess, a true gift of destiny that I do not deserve." There was silence for a few moments, broken by sounds like kisses. Catherine stood there, afraid even to move, and then she heard Vivian's timid reply. "I understand everything, Ben, and I appreciate the way you treat me. But what can I do? I can't throw my son and daughter-in-law, who is almost like a daughter to me, out on the street, especially since they used their own money to renovate the flat. And not cosmetic, but a complete overhaul from top to bottom. And they've upgraded the appliances. How can I kick them out? Again sounded a growling male voice, persuasive but resolute and quite insistent. We're adults. The fact that your son Bill and Catherine did the renovations at their own expense is their responsibility, especially since they were only doing it for their own comfort. Don't get sentimental. Your Bill has long been an adult married man, as you yourself well understand. It's time for him to make his own living arrangements. You've given him everything you can. Just show him and his wife the door and that's it. And do not wait for some suitable occasion and put this matter in a long box. You have to act immediately. Your cunning provincial sister-in-law Catherine is already at the age when it makes no sense to pull for pregnancy, which means you'll have to register the baby soon. That's when it's going to be a problem. You're a woman with a good heart, and of course you'll take care of this impudent woman who decided to put down roots in the capital, and of her child. You see, Vivian, with such an encumbrance as a minor tenant, your flat will not be on the market at all. You'll only be able to sell it at a substantial discount. You'll lose a lot of money. For what? Just because you feel sorry for your son and daughter-in-law. Have pity on yourself first. You're forced to wander the streets and corners with me. For example, now you and I would be sitting side by side on the sofa, discussing paintings or films, but we are forced, like teenagers, to hang around the streets and shoot other people's pillows. I'm so sick of this unsettledness. Vivian objected timidly. Ben, I've heard you suggest that we get rid of Catherine and Michael, but I still have no idea how to do it. If I tell my son to move out, he'll take offense. You want my daughter-in-law to have a row and run off with her husband? That's weird too. She gives no reason. On the contrary, Catherine is neat, cooks well, and doesn't scandalize. Who are they going to believe? In 7 years, we've never even had an argument. Invisible interlocutors Catherine silenced, fearing that now she will go in the direction of the house quietly, so as not to give away her presence, and without throwing away the rubbish bag, hurried back home. It was necessary to get ahead of her mother-in-law before she realized that her strange conversation had been overheard. Catherine couldn't follow the straight path, because it was viewed from the side of the containers. However, after running with all her might, she reached the saving shrubbery that covered her path to the driveway door. However, it was not until she was inside the flat that the woman calmed down completely. Putting the far from fragrant bag back in the bucket, she sighed and remembered the old omen that her grandmother had taught her: you can't throw anything out of the house in the evening. She could argue with that, though. After all, if she had not decided to eliminate the source of the bad smell, she would not have heard the strange conversation. The conversation between her mother-in-law and the stranger excited the woman, and not because of the looming prospect of leaving the hospitable flat and go to rented accommodation. There was something false in the intonation of the man whom Vivian called Ben in the conversation. Of course, it was necessary to deal with the whole situation carefully, so as not to offend her mother-in-law inadvertently. Catherine had hardly had time to unpack when the landlady entered the flat. Vivian was surprised that not her son but her daughter-in-law was at home, and said in astonishment, "Catherine, have you been here long?" "No, Vivian. About 10 to 15 minutes ago, I managed to settle all the affairs early. My parents are in a sanatorium, so I hurried back. I missed you." The mother-in-law smiled sweetly at her daughter-in-law. "Well, that's good. Michael will be here soon. He's had a bit of a work emergency. He's been working like a son of a bitch all week. You must be hungry from the road. Maybe a bite to eat?" "No, thanks," Catherine declined. "I'm going to take a shower, and then I'll have something to eat. And then when Michael gets back, we'll have dinner together." Her mother-in-law replied with a nod and a kind smile. Vivian turned on the television in the kitchen and, judging by the sounds, began to whip the batter for the biscuits. Catherine could not understand, is this woman so good at pretending that she did not reveal her discontent and thoughts about the need to separate from her son's family? Is it possible? Or was she, Catherine, so blind and deaf to the emotions of her mother-in-law that she did not notice anything? It wasn't yesterday that Vivian started having an affair with Ben. If he already allowed himself to give advice on how she should dispose of her real estate. How the woman regretted that she had given in to her curiosity and overheard her mother-in-law's conversation. If she hadn't known, everything would have been fine. Now it was necessary to somehow gently push her husband to the idea of moving to rented accommodation, or, even better, to the registration of a mortgage. Of course, most likely, when deciding to get their own flat, we'll have to pay attention to the secondary market and pick up the option in which it will be possible, as they say, to come and live. Here you are back earlier from a business trip, caught in a situation about which no anecdote will not tell. During dinner, Catherine was thoughtful and sometimes not inappropriately answered the questions that asked her husband and mother-in-law, nor did the morning bring any clarity as to how to proceed. Although there was an opportunity to rest for another day, the woman went to work, believing it would help take her mind off her troubled thoughts. Winston met her subordinate cordially, and her colleagues were surprised that Catherine did not take the chance to increase the weekend, even for a day. It had never occurred to her to open up, but not because Betty, Emma, and Maggie were bad, jealous, or stupid. It was just that their relationship didn't go beyond work cooperation. No, of course they talked sweetly at lunchtime about their own girlish things and could even go shopping or to the theater together after work. But personal boundaries were not crossed. This suited everyone perfectly. Barely waiting for the end of the working day, as agreed, Catherine met with her husband to reward each other for the separation of joint entertainment. After the cinema, the woman casually began a carefully thought-out conversation. "Michael, and you and I are not timed to take care of their homes?" The man did not even try to hide his surprise. "Catherine, why did you have such an idea? Are we not living well with my mother? I've never noticed any quarrels or disagreements. Why would we move?" Catherine was embarrassed to admit that she overheard her mother-in-law's conversation, so she made excuses. "You're right, there is no misunderstanding between us. But your mother is quite a young woman. She is only 55 soon. By today's standards, that's nothing at all the prime of life. Vivienne is a real beauty and looks young. Maybe she's got some nice plans for her personal life. And here you and I as a deterrent." Michael laughed. "But did I say deterrent? I mean, my mom's great and she looks great. But believe me, after my father left her and went off to find happiness with the new, as he put it, love of his life, she thinks of men only as traitors. You know, sometimes I remind her, perhaps not very tactfully, that she is a blooming woman, deserving of both admiration and affection. But she flatly rejects it, calling it nonsense. So you and I aren't bothering her at all. Who knows, maybe she'll have a hard time alone." Catherine agreed, deciding that it was not quite right to give away the heartfelt secrets of her mother-in-law and even her own son. Perhaps Vivienne, if she was serious about this Ben, should introduce him to the members of her family herself. Yes, that would probably be the most proper thing to do. However, the conversation she had overheard by the rubbish bins was burning Catherine up inside. To Catherine's great relief, the news of her mother-in-law's affair did not need to be kept secret for long. A little less than a week after Catherine's premature return from a business trip, Vivienne, embarrassed, announced, "I have a little surprise for you. A man with whom I am romantically involved is coming to visit us this weekend. I would very much like you to receive him in a friendly manner. He's already having a hard time making up his mind to take this step. And if you suddenly meet him with attacks, I'll be embarrassed." Michael, who was completely unprepared for this news, remained silent. Seeing that his mother-in-law is waiting for at least support, Catherine withdrew. "Vivienne, you do not worry. We will meet your guest friendly." "Yes, Michael." She turned to her husband. The dazed man nodded. "We'll help you prepare the food, of course." "There's no need to talk," the daughter-in-law continued. "Let's just decide what will be on the table." Taking advantage of the fact that his mother and wife were discussing the menu, Michael went to the computer. He wanted to distract himself from the unexpected news by fighting monsters in virtual space. By the appointed hour, when the guest was to appear in the flat, everything was ready. The table served in the large room met all the rules of hospitality. The closer was the moment of the lover's acquaintance with his son and his wife, the more anxious Vivienne became. However, the stubborn hand on the kitchen clock, as if laughing, moved forward, and the guest did not appear. At his mother's request, Michael even went down to the entrance to check the intercom. After making sure everything was in order, he began to awkwardly reassure. Probably traffic on the road. Having completed his errand, the man went back to his game, and Catherine stayed by her mother-in-law's side. Vivienne smiled nervously, and tried to call the man she had been waiting for. However, this brought no clarity. Ben's phone, as the answering machine informed her, was switched off or out of range. Catherine didn't know how to comfort her distraught mother-in-law, who was holding paper napkins, folding origami from them. All words seemed dull and inexpressive. When Vivian's smartphone played a beautiful tune, the woman hurriedly grabbed the device and responded. "Hello, speaking. Ben, is that you? What's wrong? Where are you?" The daughter-in-law tactfully went into the other room, where her husband was again entertaining himself with a computer game, and quietly explained to him. "It seems our guest has turned up. Only for some reason he didn't come in person but called your mum on the phone." Michael shrugged. "Well, I told you he was probably stuck in traffic somewhere." A few minutes later, a crying Vivian peeked into her son and daughter-in-law's room and explained. "Ben was walking towards us when he was attacked. He was hit on the head from behind and then robbed. He was unconscious for a while, and then he barely got a shop assistant to give him a phone to call. It's a good thing Ben knows my number by heart. He's got a phenomenal memory, thankfully. Well, that came in handy. Ben's at the emergency room right now. I asked him to come down here. He refused, but I insisted. What's the point? Then again, he's not going to go through the unpleasantness of the attack alone. He'd rather be in society." "That's right, of course," Michael said, and suggested, "Listen, Mum, maybe I'll go and get Ben. If that's the case, I'll pick him up from the emergency room and bring him back to us so that he'll be safe, without any adventures." Vivian smiled. "Son, I had no doubt that I raised you to be a kind and helpful person. But I had already called Ben a taxi on my smartphone. The car is already on its way to us." My sister-in-law joined the conversation. "Vivienne, you need a little makeup touch-up right away." The mother-in-law went to the mirror with her sister-in-law, and Michael shrugged his shoulders again for the umpteenth time. Women, they're such women, they think about their appearance, even when the situation doesn't favor it. However, he did not reproach his mother or his wife for this little quirk. Soon the doorbell rang, and Ben's appearance was certainly far from ideal. His light beige suit was smeared with dirt and dust. There was a fresh abrasion on his cheek. The man smiled guiltily at Michael, who opened the door for him and introduced himself. "My name is Ben. It's better to call me by my first name, of course. And if there's no objection, I'd prefer to be addressed as you. You look a lot like your mum, Michael, from what I understand, although you could be mistaken for brother and sister. So dazzlingly beautiful. It's a shame that our long-awaited acquaintance comes under such circumstances, but I was powerless against the sneak attack from behind." Vivian entered the entrance hall, limping slightly, and began to look after her guest excitedly. "Oh, Ben, come in. How you've had such a hard time. Michael, would you bring some of your things, please? Let Ben change." To her daughter-in-law's surprise, the man whose voice she had heard in her mother-in-law's conversation appeared in the corridor, but he was quite confident. He greeted her, said it was a pleasure to meet her, and thanking Michael for bringing her things, went to the bathroom to change and tidy up. Vivian, smiling, was back in the kitchen heating up a slightly cold roast. Her sister-in-law suggested, "You chat to Ben and I'll turn the fire down and come round. Don't worry, Vivian, it's all right now." The mother-in-law thanked her sister-in-law and hurried over to the set table. It seemed that the recent incident had not affected Ben's mood at all. Michael's questions about how the man was going to look for his attackers were answered. "Well, I probably won't report them to the police. I was once involved in law enforcement and I realized that this case, if pursued by legal methods, is practically futile. I still have some connections, so I'll deal with it myself. It will be faster and more effective." When everyone was finally at the table, Ben presented himself very confidently, talking about the past and present, developing the theme with a nightingale, drawing wonderful prospects. According to the man, meeting Vivian had restored his faith that there were real women who valued genuine feelings. "As a decent man, I, parting with my wife, with whom we lost almost all points of contact, left a significant part of the property to her and her adult son. I have no child support obligations because Jim is almost 20. But whenever possible, I help him out. Fortunately, I have a steady job, and in fact, I was the originator of this firm, and I am one of the principals. Although I'm renting a place in a hostel now, I'm not what you'd call poor. My best friend has asked me to stay with him several times, but I don't want to embarrass him, so I refuse. After all, I don't live on the street, and I'm fine with the way things are. Later, if Vivian was lucky enough to agree to tie her life to me, I would, like a real man, solve the flat question. Vivian, who at that moment was just putting a puffed salad with prawns on her guest's plate, shuddered and dropped a few pieces on the tablecloth. The man didn't even seem to notice and continued his confession. Unfortunately, the ring case was stolen from me. I don't want the interference of some scoundrels to spoil such a wonderful evening. I promise to present you with the most beautiful ring I can find. The daughter-in-law saw how embarrassed her mother-in-law was and could not understand how it happened that this wise woman, judging by her appearance, believed in Ben's every word. There was something not at all sincere, luscious in his intonation, as if it were a marshmallow covered with honey and icing sugar. But she could probably only make that out because she had heard Ben's plans for removing the annoying nuisance of Emma and Michael from his lover's territory a little earlier, in contrast to what the guest had been saying at the bins. At the table, he'd gone from complimenting Vivienne to sweet-talking her son and daughter-in-law. You two are such a wonderful couple. Michael, I've heard so many good things about you and Vivian that I confess I thought it was just a maternal exaggeration. But now that I've met you, I admit my mistake. It's really nice to see you taking care of your mum. Catherine, you're a wonderful person too. Your hard work ethic commands real respect, and I have an incredible joy to see how you treat your mother-in-law. The man felt almost like a master at the table. He poured drinks into the glasses and proposed a toast. Michael and Catherine, I wish your family happiness and prosperity. I've noticed that you understand each other half-heartedly. I wish Vivienne and I could have that kind of idyll, but I would like to raise my glass to mutual understanding and, I hope, to a strong family friendship. Catherine was shocked at how hypocritical her mother-in-law's suitor was. Ben could probably be given some kind of award for unrivaled acting skills, but my intuition told me that the man was trying not for some statuette from the Film Academy, but for more weighty rewards. For example, for the opportunity to settle in a cozy flat and live happily ever after. Vivian smiled at her chosen one, and stubbornly did not notice that he behaves like a hypocrite. And perhaps it was impossible to blame her for that. Even Michael, who was looking attentively at the guest, seemed to listen to his court speeches favorably. To put it another way, Ben voices quite differently from what he thinks. His true goal is to settle into Vivian's living quarters, and a peaceful, pleasant relationship can be forgotten. There was only one way out of the stalemate: to sit quietly, to watch how events would develop, and not to trust the beau of her mother-in-law, who turned out to be an excellent pretender. Ben, on the other hand, went on the offensive. And at the end of the evening, when a flustered Vivian and Catherine served dessert, he asked for a moment's attention. Silence settled in the room, and the man asked directly, "Vivian, I ask you to answer, do you agree to marry me, or do you need to think about it?" Vivian, putting her hands to her tanned cheeks, simply nodded her head. Ben was next to the woman in a few steps, embraced her, began to kiss her, not embarrassed by the presence of Michael and Catherine. The somewhat savory scene ended only after a minute. Ben, having broken away from his lover, turned to Michael and, hugging Vivian by the waist, asked, "Bless Mum. It's very important that you understand and accept. Your mum deserves happiness, and I intend to provide it for her." Michael nodded. Catherine, amazed at such a rapid development of events, did not dare to spoil the touching moment with the statement that to arrange happiness is going to Ben on the territory of Vivian, previously removed from the flat relatives of the future wife. Everything spun almost lightning fast. That evening, despite the entreaties of Vivian, Ben with Michael's things still went to the hostel in a taxi, called almost a stepson. Now, however, Catherine's fiancé of a mother-in-law had become an almost daily visitor to his fiancé's flat. On the very next working day, the not young lovers applied for marriage and even set a wedding day. Vivian, announcing the news to her son and daughter-in-law, complained. What bureaucrats. People turned to them with their joy. And the person who took the application acted as if we owed her our lives just because she condescended to talk to us. She's a bore. There is no other name for her. As if she had a task to spoil the mood at any cost. She started by checking, several times, whether we had brought original certificates of cancellation of previous marriages. As if they didn't have that information on their computer. I don't believe it. Nowadays. Even duplicate birth certificates are made in one or two. But that was just the beginning. This Cerberus woman said she was legally obliged to do some sort of probationary period of 30 days. And that was it. No matter how Ben and I explained what we were asking for. No matter how much we begged her to sign us without a solemn atmosphere, but on the day of application to no avail. She grinned at us when we refused all sorts of things like their photographer, pigeon rentals, and a saxophonist. I could barely contain myself, looking at me and Ben like we were second-class citizens. I could see she was trying to cheat us. She offered to pay for all these services, from which she obviously has her own profit, but not to use them, to sign without a fuss, but faster. And this person started being rude. Smirking, she said that we are not under any exception, except for the pregnancy of the bride do not fit. Anyway, I put up with her and told her that if she didn't stop acting like a market trader, I would complain to her. Good thing Ben stopped me. I'm afraid I would have said something else to her. I thought about asking for the book of complaints and suggestions, but I didn't want to stay there too long. Michael supported his mom, and rightly so. What's so archaic about a book of complaints and suggestions? Who's going to see the best reviews of this cheeky person on the internet anyway? A lot more people are going to see them. That's what I'm going to do today. I will leave a review of the Queen of the Registry Office on all platforms. No one has the right to be rude to my mum. Vivian smiled, but Catherine noticed that her mother-in-law was not amused at all. Ben, who was standing next to Vivian, put his arm around her shoulders and comforted her. Honey, it's better this way. I mean, we have time to prepare the wedding. I'm sure you deserve a real celebration. In the time we were given, we will have time to buy outfits and generally prepare the celebration. I want you to remember this day forever. The persuasion of her son and the groom calmed Vivian, and she, although embarrassed at first, but began to prepare the second wedding in her life. Ben said that he would take care of booking the restaurant and other nuances, from choosing a toastmaster to ordering a cake, and his beloved would be completely free from these worries. And me, dear Vivian, why do you need all this fuss? Ben said. I'll choose the best options, present them to you for consideration. I'll tell you what to look out for. In the end, we'll do it the way you want it done. You rest up and get on with the dress, the jewelry, the stylist. And what else is required? The day of the wedding was fast approaching, and Vivienne was still hesitant to buy a wedding dress. On the weekend before the week before the Friday of the wedding, the bride decided to go shopping. A trip to boutiques with smart dresses and shoe show shops. Vivienne invited her sister-in-law, Catherine, along. She, of course, didn't refuse. She enjoyed watching her mother-in-law cheer up and even look younger as she tried on dresses and suits. Vivienne enjoyed twirling in front of the mirrors, although she flatly refused, in her own words, to make people laugh with a veil and snow-white dress. However, experienced counselors in the shops were not at all embarrassed by this. At what age happiness comes to people. As a result, after visiting several shopping centers and many hours of fitting, the bride of elegant age was picked up a wonderful dress of an incredibly refreshing shade of turquoise. It was complemented by marvelous boat shoes on a stable heel. But Vivian was a little embarrassed by the price of the outfit. On a mental impulse, Catherine reacted instantly and paid for the outfit with her card. Nothing is too much for a special day. Especially the dress not only suits you, but as if it was sewn on you. By the way, it can be worn not only at a wedding. It is an excellent option for any festive event. Vivian smiled sincerely. Thank you, Catherine, for helping me decide. I probably would have gone for a more budget-friendly option myself. Remember the light sandy suit from the department with the bright scarlet robe? The mannequins at the entrance. And then you'd regret it. Now let's find you something interesting. Catherine agreed, and not because she needed a new outfit. In principle, she had a win-win option: successfully modest dress, in which she shone on the second day of her wedding. Her sister-in-law simply loved the fact that she and her mother-in-law had developed a complete rapport in the process of finding outfits. However, the more she talked to Vivienne, the more she became convinced that Ben influenced her not the most positive way. So in the cafe, where the women went to take a break from the marathon in the shopping aisles, mother-in-law flatly refused to eat and leisurely drank a cup of green tea without sugar. Catherine was quite puzzled. After all, Vivian was a sweet tooth, and as far as her sister-in-law knew, at every opportunity ordered cakes or at least a milkshake. The mother-in-law herself made the situation clear. I'm trying to lose a little weight because Ben likes slim women. Otherwise, he takes me round the waist and gently counts the fat folds. So I have to give up some of my favorite treats. I've even considered gastric reduction surgery, Catherine. It's called something clever, so you can eat less. Catherine was unpleasantly surprised at Ben's influence. After all, Vivian was terrified of surgery of any kind. Even an ingrown toenail, she didn't dare trust the surgeon at the clinic, and spent almost 2 weeks to get rid of the problem, making lotions. Although in a medical center it would have taken a few minutes, not counting the waiting time in the queue. And then suddenly this strange confession. Very unexpected. Especially as Vivian's figure was almost perfect. And Ben's behavior was highly indelicate and unfair. But the groom had taken too much power over his bride. Catherine became uneasy. After all, if the mother-in-law is thinking about the operation, then Ben's idea with the release of the flat she will sooner or later support. So to postpone a conversation with her husband and not to confess is impossible. Waiting until the not young, but persistent groom took the bride for a walk, Catherine began a difficult explanation. However, she began the conversation from afar. Listen, Michael. This Ben seemed to me somehow dishonest. He seems to be saying all the right things, but he doesn't seem sincere. Plus, he's not even married to your mum yet, and he's already encouraging her to lose weight. And that's not all. Catherine told her husband all that she heard near the rubbish bins, and asked, let's you and me not wait until your mother asks us out of the flat. I think she'll be too uncomfortable with you right now. We'll use our savings. We'll make a down payment on the mortgage and move into our own place. I think that would be a nice addition to the wedding present. Michael saddened and stunned his wife with a return confession. You see, I gave almost all of our savings to Ben literally this morning. He told me he wasn't going to meet his budget, but he didn't want to withdraw the money from the bank deposit because he'd lose interest if he did. Michael, how much do we have left? Catherine asked anxiously. Only 100,000. But don't worry. Ben promised that he would pay it all back in a few months, as soon as his deposit expired. The woman tried to control herself and even tried to calm her husband. But there is a positive side to all this. It means that you and I won't be evicted anytime soon. And then Ben will give us the money and you and I will take out a mortgage. Michael felt guilty and began to justify himself. I'm sorry, Catherine. I don't even know how I gave in to his persuasion. He seemed to explain everything so logically that we will soon become a family and that he, me, even with a small bonus, will return everything. Imagine I was so penetrated by his story about the trip he was going to buy for my mum on a surprise wedding trip that I didn't even ask for a receipt. But he's not going to cheat me, almost his stepson. In the head of Catherine flashed a bad suspicion, but she did not voice it, so as not to upset the already settled Michael, and tried to cheer him up. Don't worry about a thing. In fact, Ben is marrying your mum in less than a week. We're not going to ask for an ex post facto receipt to spoil their relationship, said Catherine. Well, let's think about how to prepare the flat for the festive day. Probably we'll have to decorate everything at night, so that it would be a surprise for Vivian. Although Catherine reassured her husband, she herself was anxious. By her rough estimate, her husband had given Ben almost 200,000. This amount should not only be more than enough for the trip, but also for the entire festive banquet, which was decided to arrange for a very small circle of guests. Besides, her first impression of what she had heard from Ben was not in his favor. There was nothing she could do about it now. It was good to know that she had no more secrets from Michael. Vivian and Ben's wedding had been wonderful. The newly married husband was touchingly courting his already lawful wife, and all the guests were sure that this marriage would be strong and happy. The man, pictorially getting down on one knee, presented his gift to his beloved. You are my goddess. I have long thought how I can thank you for agreeing to be my wife, and after a few sleepless nights I've come up with an idea. I suggest you to go on a journey to the island where, according to legend, Aphrodite herself lived. The guests amicably applauded, approving the romantic deed and generous gift of Ben. And only Catherine, for some reason, could not be genuinely happy for her mother-in-law. After all, the voyage was actually paid not at all newlyweds, and financed from the savings of the son and daughter-in-law. Their first night, the newlyweds, by prior agreement, were to spend in a luxury hotel room, and only then return to Vivian's flat. Michael and Catherine welcomed the couple with a delicious breakfast with delicacies, but the daughter-in-law noticed that her mother-in-law was very worried about something. "Vivian, what's wrong?" "You seem pensive," Catherine asked when the men had gone to see if they could fix the washing machine that had suddenly broken down. "Oh, Catherine. Yesterday, already close to midnight, Ben received a phone call from his friend, aka business partner. Well, it looks like the nice and relaxing honeymoon is canceled," Vivian said regretfully. "I guess I'll have to give up the tickets." What a friend. He couldn't send someone else. Allegedly, Ben was the only one he could trust to inspect the Anchorage branch, which was almost as close to Alaska as he could get. "Too bad you and Michael won't be able to take time off work and go on holiday instead of us. Ben will have to go on a long business trip. And I was already counting on the fact that he and I would spend a whole week in the hot sun and swimming in the warm waves. Crete is my dream, and in the velvet season. It would be a holiday. But not fate, unfortunately." Catherine tried to console her mother-in-law. "But there are circumstances when you have to adjust plans. My mother always says to me everything that is done all for the best. So fate has ordered. But Baron won't miss you." Vivian picked up the cat, who was proudly marching next to the sofa, and looking at the furry pet, agreed. "Exactly. At least Baron won't suffer. Although, to be honest, it seems to me that he is completely indifferent, who pours food, water, and his litter box is cleaned. As long as everything is done on time." From the topic of the disrupted holiday, the women moved on to discussing the characters of the cat family in general and Baron in particular. It was much more enjoyable than being upset about something that couldn't be changed. When Ben and Michael returned to the women, Vivian's mood was much better. The feeling of awkwardness was almost non-existent. Ben had somehow managed not to remind his wife of the impending imminent separation. By tacit agreement at the table, the subject was not brought up at all. After the final meal together, Ben said, as a matter of course, "If nobody minds, I'm going to sleep here tonight." It felt weird going to a hostel, especially since they'd recently renovated the place, and it smelled accordingly. No one objected. Maybe Michael felt a little awkward, thinking that in the next room his mother would be cuddling with Ben, but he didn't object. Catherine didn't feel she had any say in the matter at all. Since her mother-in-law was married, where else should her spouse spend the night but with her? Catherine had suggested it out of the goodness of her heart. The vouchers to Crete are going up in flames. Maggie jumped at the idea of a seaside holiday. "I haven't used up my holiday yet. I reckon Winston can sign me off for a week. You've got my back, haven't you?" And the girl colleagues nodded in agreement. There wasn't much of a jam at work, so why not let someone enjoy a holiday at the sea? However, when Catherine called her mother-in-law to arrange the sale of vouchers, Vivian asked to contact Ben, because only he had all the information. The man, however, upset both Catherine and Maggie, who had dreamed of a pleasant trip. "Oh, Catherine, I'm sorry, but I've already booked the tickets." Unexpectedly, a co-worker came up on his own, having learnt that I was going away on a business trip these days. Ben's business trip was over even faster than he expected. Upon his return, without asking anyone, the man moved into his wife's flat. He brought with him not only a minimum of things, but also souvenirs from Alaska pine nuts, a cone, some healing balm and magnets with views of the cities he had traveled through. Ben didn't look exhausted at all, and he explained. "I had a great rest on the train. The neighbors on the train were great. One had 4 children and was silent on the top shelf most of the time. The other 2 are quiet pensioners. They drink a bottle of beer, mutter about how everything used to be tastier, walk to the toilet and sleep, wake up and repeat the ceremony. All in all, just lucky." Although Ben radiated joy at being near his beloved again. And Vivian was shining like a new coin, too. Catherine was uncomfortable with the look she was catching on her. Her mother-in-law's husband was clearly showing unequivocal interest, but he managed not to cross the line of propriety. Catherine sometimes even thought that she was imagining things. I don't know where he was looking. But he looked at her like that. What if she was at his eye level? Maybe there was nothing wrong with his gaze, but she still tried to be alone with him as little as possible. However, it was impossible to avoid seeing him completely, living in the same flat. Ben sometimes playfully suggested when there was no one else around in the kitchen. What, Catherine? Tea? Coffee? Dance? When a woman ran away, he tried to pinch her, and once I even had to throw water on him. Sometimes Ben unintentionally touched his wife's daughter-in-law when he took something from her hands, and Catherine didn't like it. She decided to complain to Michael only after her mother-in-law's disheveled husband had slapped her on the buttocks and suggested that they take a shower together. Catherine slapped Ben and locked herself in her room without even going out to dinner, saying she was not feeling well. When I brought my wife tea, she asked me to sit down and began to tell me. Listen to me calmly and don't be so eager to do something about it right now. I don't want you to end up under investigation because this bore seems to have connections with the police. Anyway, I can't live here anymore. Ben's getting handsy, even though I've given him no reason to. I try to stay out of his sight. It's like he's watching me. Michael, I think he's just trying to get me mad so I can get you to move out of the flat. That's it, he's won. I can't do this anymore. First of all, it's just immoral behavior on his part. Secondly, this behavior is a real betrayal of your mother. She truly believes this, Ben, Catherine said. And he's being an old goat. Please take the money he took from you and let's get out of here. I don't want to ruin things with your mom, but I know that if I told her the truth, she and I would just have a fight. Michael was shocked. He had no idea that such an outrage was happening right under his nose. Waiting until morning when only he and Ben were left in the flat, the man began to talk, deciding to start in a good way. Listen, how's your deposit coming? It's expired. I could use the money right now. Ben wasn't embarrassed. Oh, here's the thing. Well, while I was away on business, the contract was automatically renewed, and all the accumulated interest was also included in the principal deposit, according to one of the clauses of the contract. Anyway, I hate to keep you waiting, but you have to understand that doing something about the deposit now is a loss to yourself. If it's so urgent, I'll borrow money from a friend tomorrow to pay you back. I'm embarrassed about what happened. Ben looked so remorseful that Michael felt ashamed to ask for his own money back. However, he had an even more important matter to discuss, so he asked directly. Okay, I'll wait a couple more weeks with the debt. Tell me something, why are you always looking at my Catherine? It's totally out of line. My wife's been complaining to me about you hitting on her. What is that supposed to mean? Ben had a heart attack. Michael, I hope you don't believe this. Catherine is like a daughter to me. Besides, she's someone else's wife, already a taboo. But not only that, she's your spouse. How could I be such a jerk as to make a move on her? Michael even had doubts about the truth of Catherine's words. Ben was so convincing. But Michael still asked one more question. You mean you didn't slap her on the soft spot last night? The man was indignant. Of course not. I didn't want to tell you, but your wife is getting on my nerves. I kept quiet so as not to upset you, but she's all over me. It's embarrassing. How many times have I told Catherine to behave like a decent woman? It's like she's provoking me on purpose. She probably wants to compromise me in your eyes. I have a wife of my own, Michael. Catherine, who had come home for her forgotten purse and overheard a conversation that was not meant for her ears, almost jumped into the room. Now, Ben, repeat everything you just said with your filthy tongue. But look me in the eye. Am I being dishonest? You've got some nerve, haven't you? Don't talk too much. I'm the one who's giving you a hard time. You're making it seem like it's the other way around to Michael, aren't you? Aren't you ashamed of lying like that? You've lived to see gray hairs, but instead of wisdom, you've pumped in immorality. You're a slouching bastard, an M-word freak. Ben cringed. Michael, where did you find such an ill-mannered person? What kind of language is that? It's as if your Catherine was brought up under a fence. Did she have marginalized parents who didn't teach her how to talk to older people? Catherine was furious. "Don't you dare mention my parents, you bastard. Why are you bringing in my provincial origin? It has nothing to do with it. If you really are an weirdo." "Well, we can't have a constructive dialogue like this, so we'll act within the legal framework. Now you sit down and write a receipt stating that you borrowed money from Michael on such and such a date, and that you promised to repay it by New Year's Eve. My husband is a decent man, and for some reason he took your word for it. And judging by the fact that you're lying through your teeth, that's the only way to communicate with you, by documenting all agreements. You're an unreliable man, not a man." Ben grinned. "How rude you are, as if you're from the provinces. By the way, I didn't borrow money from you. I borrowed it from your husband. So you're not in charge. I made a deal with him, not you. Michael's a good man. You're a marketer. Shut your mouth." Catherine turned to her husband with anger. "Michael, why don't you say something? I'm being insulted. And you still take this man at his word. You are at risk. Our money can never be returned. Tell him to sit down and write a receipt. You can't take his word for it." Ben kept smirking. "Come on, Michael, listen to your wife. Follow her instructions." Michael finally came to his senses and asked softly, but not to Ben, but to his wife. "Catherine, calm down, please go to work. We are going to solve everything man to man. Really, it is not you to command." From offense, Catherine almost cried. How so? Her beloved husband suddenly took the side of this rude man. Grabbing the purse, for which she returned so untimely, the woman left the flat, where so many years she was happy. On the way to work, Catherine calmed down a little, although her husband's behavior displeased her very much. Instead of standing up in her defense, Michael suddenly decided to show male solidarity. Upset, the woman thought. How am I going to be able to rely on this man, now that he's being so cowardly in a critical situation? Colleagues noticed that the slightly late for work Catherine was upset about something. But to cautious inquiry, she kept silent or told a story about insomnia and subsequent fatigue. Emma recommended pills to help her sleep. Betty offered the phone number of a sleep specialist. Politely thanking her colleagues, Catherine wrote down the information, but continued to think about the future of her marriage. Is there any point in keeping the family together if her husband doesn't take his wife's words seriously? How to prove to him that Ben was lying? How to behave further? Catherine suddenly realized that Ben had provoked this conflict on purpose, which should push her and Michael to move out. What a trickster. He's practically got it all worked out. There was a crack in the rapport with her husband, whom Ben envied out loud. So it is urgent to make peace with Michael, to jointly confront the brazen liar threatening the family. Catherine tried calling her husband, but he seemed to be dropping calls. Figured Michael was just busy, the woman thought. She tried to put everything that wasn't work-related out of her mind. It was not enough because of the unpleasant conflict with the husband of her mother-in-law to make mistakes. In the evening at home, Catherine was in for an unpleasant surprise. Her belongings were packed in 2 traveling suitcases that stood in the hallway. Vivian called her sister-in-law into the kitchen and demanded, "Give me the keys to my flat. I'm not going to tolerate such an insolent woman on my property." Your lies gave Ben a heart attack. It's a good thing Michael didn't leave for work in time to take him to the clinic. So get out of my face. Catherine felt betrayed. How could she be? No one believed her, but Ben turned out to be nothing short of a saintly sufferer. However, the woman was not going to give up and asked, "Vivian, listen to me. You probably got a distorted version of our quarrel with Ben, and I want to tell you what really happened. Your husband took money from Michael without even leaving a receipt. It wasn't enough for him to vacate the flat. Ben manipulated Michael's judgment and provoked an argument with me, and you fell for his lies. My things were packed. That's a shame. I don't know if Michael knows about all this, but if he is, it's kind of funny. Your husband's not just going to stop at evicting me from my flat. Michael will be next. You're blinded by love, and you don't see how Ben is robbing you of your intimacy. You should kick him to the curb, if only for sowing doubts about your figure. See the light of day. He's a brazen invader, unprincipled at first, but poisonous, poisoning the atmosphere." Vivian could not bear the attacks on her beloved husband. She pointed her daughter-in-law at the door. "Get out of here." Catherine did not waste any more time trying to change her mother-in-law's mind, realizing that it was useless. She put a bunch of keys on the table, took the suitcases, and went to the hotel, since she didn't have so many close friends in the capital to turn up for a sleepover. Yes, it is certainly impossible to predict what the coming day prepares us, Catherine thought. Could I have guessed that in the evening I would be looking for a place to sleep? Perhaps it was my own fault. I should have exposed this imposed Ben right after the conversation at the rubbish dump. I should have been proactive, as they say. But how could I have seen this coming? A sad Catherine settled into a small room of an inexpensive hotel, and without waiting for a call from her husband, she poured tears on her pillow and fell into a troubled sleep. She saw the distorted faces of her mother-in-law and her husband, who suddenly lost his human form and turned into a goat with big horns and a beard. Bill, who smiled cheekily, winked, hummed about the ringing phone, and offered to comfort. Michael was as tall as a preschooler who taught poetry while begging Vivienne for candy. The images changed in a strange whirlwind from which Catherine was pulled by the sound of the alarm clock. Regardless of her own wishes, the woman had to tidy up and go to work, pretending that nothing catastrophic in her life had happened. A call from Michael had to wait 2 whole days. And when her husband appointed her a meeting, Catherine, for some reason, doomed thought here, and comes to the end of my metropolitan fairy tale. Michael will probably ask for a divorce. Well and all right. However, the man came to the cafe not alone, but together with Vivienne, who was visibly nervous. "Catherine," said Michael, "by the way, I'm very guilty that I doubted your sanity. It turns out that Ben is a confidence trickster. Of course, it took some effort to get him to confess. But Stephen helped me reach people who had people other than Ben telling the truth. He confessed to everything. Turns out the deception started the moment he came to meet him. No one attacked him. It was just a psychological trick. Like by helping him, we subconsciously thought we'd invested in him, and he was no longer seen as an outsider. That's about right. And he didn't go on a business trip. And he didn't buy the vouchers. He had them printed at a photo studio. Ben gave some of the money back, but it doesn't look like he's going to get much more than that. Mom doesn't want to report him to the police. She's ashamed that she contributed to the deception in some way." Vivienne, taking her daughter-in-law's hands in hers, began to plead. "Catherine, daughter, come home. I promise you, no one will ever hurt you or kick you out again. I was wrong, and I want you to be generous. Forgive me, come back." Catherine carefully released her hands, explained. "Vivienne, I hold no grudge against you. After all, you are free to do whatever you want on your own territory. I don't have to tolerate the presence of people you don't like. Only I'm not a toy to be thrown out of the house and then taken back in. I'm even grateful to that bastard for opening my eyes to your true attitude towards me. Michael also opened up in ways I never imagined. You know, you stay in your flat. I think I'm going to file for divorce. I'll do 2 weeks and then I'll go home. The flat issue was really messing everyone up." No matter how hard Michael tried to keep his family together, Catherine was adamant. Her mom and dad would always be waiting for her in her hometown. And anyway, what are her years? She was sure to find someone who would trust her unconditionally.